The forest was thick. It had always been thick, ancient, gnarled, tangled with roots that clawed at the earth like grasping fingers. But tonight it felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were leaning inward to listen. The air lay dense on the skin, damp with moss and rot and old magic that had never truly faded from this place. The forbidden forest. Harry stood at its edge and let the memories come, because fighting them was pointless. They had a way of surfacing when the world grew quiet like this. Once, not so very long ago, he had walked into these woods alone. Unarmed. Unaccompanied. A boy carrying nothing but resignation and a death sentence he had accepted because he believed there was no other way. He could still remember the feel of the earth beneath his bare feet, the way the darkness had swallowed the path behind him until Hogwarts itself had vanished, leaving him with nothing but the steady drum of his heart and the certainty that he was about to die. Come to die by my hand. Voldemort's words echoed faintly in his mind, stripped of their power by time but never truly gone. Harry exhaled slowly. Now he was standing in the same forest again. But this time he was not alone. Behind him, the forest was alive with quiet motion. Cloaks brushed against bark. Boots shifted on leaves. Wands glimmered faintly as hands tightened and loosened around familiar grips. Voices were hushed, disciplined, controlled, not fearful, but taut with anticipation. Witches and wizards. Veterans, some of them, others barely old enough to have seen the Second War, but hardened nonetheless by the Third. They stood in formation without needing to be told, the way soldiers did when they trusted the one standing at the front. Harry turned slightly, just enough to see them without fully facing them. The Phoenix Legion. They did not wear insignia. They did not bear banners. There would be no songs sung about them, no heroic paintings hung in gilded halls. A few years ago, history had painted a simpler picture. There had been a castle under siege, a dark lord at its gates, a boy standing in defiance with the world watching, waiting for him to fall or rise. Harry remembered fighting for those walls, remembered bleeding for them, remembered believing, truly believing, that Hogwarts was something immutable, something sacred enough to be defended at all costs. Now he stood in the shadows of the same forest, preparing to march on the same castle from the opposite direction. And there would be people inside who would fight to stop him. Teachers who once taught him spells meant to protect. Students who would raise their wands believing they were defending light against darkness. Men and women who would curse his name without ever knowing it. The irony did not escape him. It never had. History, Harry had learned, did not care about intention, cared about results, about who stood at the end and who did not. He wondered briefly how it would right him this time. Would he be remembered as a tyrant who turned his wand on the very institution that had shaped him? A traitor who marched beneath the banner of a bird that once symbolized hope? Or would he simply become another footnote, another necessary monster, flattened into ink and margins by people who needed the world to be simpler than it was? He did not know. And for once, he did not try to guess. Harry looked back toward the castle, its towers barely visible through the trees, lit faintly against the night sky. Hogwarts looked the same as it always had, proud, ancient, indifferent to the blood that had soaked its grounds time and time again. It had to be this way, he murmured, not to his soldiers, but to the past version of himself who still lingered somewhere in these woods. That boy would have hated this. The man did not. Harry straightened, the weight of hesitation settling into something colder and steadier. He was no longer walking toward death. He was walking toward responsibility, toward a choice that would stain him whether he succeeded or failed. He turned fully now, facing the Phoenix Legion. They watched him in silence. No cheers, no speeches demanded, no one needed convincing. They were here because they had already decided. Harry lifted his hand, not dramatically, but deliberately. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice carrying farther than it should have in the dense forest. "There's no retreat after this. No clean ending." A few heads nodded. "We don't do this for glory," he continued, "and we don't do it for history. We do it because if we don't, everything remain the same." His gaze hardened. "I won't ask you to believe you'll be forgiven. I won't promise you'll be remembered kindly." He lowered his hand slowly. "But I will promise this: when the night ends, the world will still exist. And sometimes that has to be enough." Silence answered him. Then, as one, they moved. Harry turned back toward the forest path leading to Hogwarts and took the first step forward. Once he had come here to die. Now he came to take the castle. And whether history would damn him or erase him entirely, that was a problem for another age. Tonight he had a duty, and as the leader of the Phoenix Legion, he would see it done. The Phoenix Legion was not his creation. He had never named it, never founded it. That honor and that burden belonged to Hermione Granger. After the Second Wizarding War ended, the world had celebrated loudly and healed quietly. There had been parades, speeches, medals pressed into hands that still shook from battle. Harry and Ron had been swept into the Ministry almost immediately. Symbols too powerful to ignore, weapons too dangerous to leave idle. They were given offices, authority, titles that suggested control. Hermione had chosen a different path. She had gone back to Hogwarts. Harry remembered the day she told him, her voice firm, her eyes already distant with purpose. "I'm not finished learning," she'd said. "Not when the world is like this." And she hadn't been. She completed her education with marks so high they rewrote the scale itself. Professors argued over how to record them. Newt results that would not be matched again. Not because they couldn't be, but because no one else had ever cared enough to push that far. She graduated not as a war heroine, but as a scholar. And then she went to the Ministry of Magic. She believed, truly believed, that the war had changed something fundamental. She believed that the old rot had burned away with Voldemort's fall. She was wrong. The minister had changed. A handful of lords had changed. The names on the plaques were different, the smiles more polished, the language more careful. But power? Power remained exactly where it had always been. Pureblood hands still shaped the laws. Pureblood voices still decided what justice looked like. Pureblood families still closed ranks when one of their own stumbled. Hermione Granger, brightest witch of her generation, war veteran, strategist, was placed behind a desk. A low-ranking clerk. Because of her birth. Her supervisor was Pansy Parkinson. Harry remembered Hermione coming home that night, fury held together by sheer force of will. "She barely passed," Hermione had said, pacing. "Barely, and she's signing off on policy that affects thousands of lives." That had been the moment something in her broke, and something sharper took its place. She went looking. She found Muggle-born witches and wizards who had never been offered ministry positions despite impeccable records. Half-bloods whose promotions stalled for reasons no one would write down. Magical creatures who had fought in the war and then been quietly pushed back into margins once their usefulness ended. She listened. She documented. She connected dots that had been deliberately scattered. And then she acted. The Phoenix Legion was not born in a dramatic speech or a secret hall. It was born in basements, in abandoned warehouses, in quiet conversations where people admitted, for the first time, that they were tired of being grateful for scraps. It was built from Muggle-borns who had lost opportunities, half-bloods who had lost faith, and magical beings who had never been given either. Hermione did not promise them victory. She promised them change. And when the ministry moved to silence her, quietly, efficiently, Harry had understood something he had spent years trying not to see. The war had never really ended. It had only changed uniforms. Hermione Granger did not believe in violence. Not at first. When the Phoenix Legion began, it did not march with wands raised or spells half-formed on tongues. It marched with parchment and voices, with banners charmed to float rather than strike, with slogans written carefully enough to be impossible to dismiss as radical but sharp enough to make people uncomfortable. They gathered in Diagon Alley, where gold and tradition intersected so neatly that no one liked being reminded who was excluded. They gathered in Hogsmeade, where students laughed and drank butterbeer while pretending the world beyond the village gates did not exist. Hermione stood at the front of those early marches with her chin lifted and her hands empty. "Peaceful," she told them again and again. "We don't give them an excuse." And that, paradoxically, made everything harder. The wizarding world was tired. It had survived 2 wars in 1 generation, and the people who had fought on the so-called light side wanted rest, not reckoning. They wanted to believe the story was finished, that evil had been defeated and justice had followed naturally. Hermione's marches disrupted that comfort. They reminded people that victory had not been evenly distributed, that while the Dark Lord was gone, the structures that had enabled him were still standing, polished, renamed, and quietly thriving. Many veterans crossed the street to avoid her protests. Some pretended not to see her at all. Others muttered words like ungrateful and troublemaker under their breath. And Ron had changed. He wore ministry robes now, had an office with his name on the door. He laughed more easily, complained about paperwork, talked about promotions like they were proof that the world was finally moving in the right direction. Hermione watched him drift further into that life with a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. "You don't understand," Ron said one night, frustration edging his voice. "I finally have something good. I'm finally doing well. Why would you risk that?" Hermione stared at him like she didn't recognize the boy she had once gone to war with. "Because people are still being buried quietly," she replied. "Because the same families still decide who matters. Because pretending it's over doesn't make it true." Ron ran a hand through his hair. "You're making enemies," he said. "You're making me look bad." That was when Hermione realized the argument had already been lost. They fought after that, often, loudly, about whether it was fair to demand more from a world that had already given so much blood. Harry watched those arguments from the edges. He did not intervene. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something both of them were still circling. Some breakups were not failures. They were inevitabilities. Ron wanted power. Hermione wanted justice. They parted not with betrayal, but with exhaustion. And the Phoenix Legion marched on. The turning point came during what was meant to be another peaceful demonstration in Diagon Alley. They stood in ordered lines, chanting softly, holding signs enchanted to glow rather than provoke. Hermione was halfway through a speech, measured, careful, impossible to twist into sedition. That was when the Aurors moved. They claimed the crowd was obstructing commerce. They claimed there had been reports of agitators. They claimed restraint, even as shields flared and batons came down. Hermione never raised her wand. She never had the chance. The first body hit the cobblestones hard enough that the sound echoed. The second screamed. The third didn't move at all. 3 protesters died before Hermione could even understand what she was seeing. The alley exploded into chaos. Spells flew, some defensive, some desperate, some born of terror rather than intent. The Aurors responded in kind, trained reflexes cutting through panic with lethal efficiency. By the time Hermione forced her way to the fallen, blood was already pooling where parchment signs had been trampled into the street. 12 names. 12 funerals the Ministry would call unfortunate but necessary. Hermione stood over them, hands shaking, her voice lost in the noise. And in that moment something fundamental shifted. Peace had been answered with force. Restraint had been answered with death. The war did not begin because Hermione declared it. It began because the Ministry did. By the time she regained control, it was already too late. The Phoenix Legion was no longer a movement asking to be heard. It was an enemy. Harry did not need time to think. The news reached him in fragments. 12 dead in Diagon Alley, aura shields raised against unarmed protesters, the Ministry calling it an unfortunate escalation, and Harry stood from his desk before the parchment finished burning. He removed his Ministry badge, set it neatly on the polished wood, and walked out. By nightfall, the wizarding world had decided what he was. Traitor. The boy who lived too long and finally broke. Harry accepted every name without comment. He went to Hermione. She was still shaking when he found her. Her eyes were red, but not from tears. From rage held so tightly it threatened to fracture her entirely. "I'm done pretending," she said hoarsely, before he could speak. "I won't beg anymore. I won't march quietly to my own grave." Harry didn't hesitate. "Good," he said simply. "Then you won't be alone." That was the moment the war became inevitable. Not because Hermione wanted blood, but because the Ministry did not understand how dangerous it was to create enemies who no longer believed reform was possible. The Phoenix Legion hardened. Peaceful organizers became tacticians. Archivists became quartermasters. Protest routes became supply lines. Defensive wards became fortifications. The Ministry responded with force. The Legion answered in kind. Manors burned, not because the Legion delighted in destruction, but because war did not allow half measures. Old pureblood estates, once untouchable, went up in enchanted fire as symbols as much as strategic targets. Ministry offices vanished overnight. Flu networks were sabotaged. Safe houses fell. Aurors defected. Others died. Many died. It was not like fighting Voldemort. Voldemort had been a singular evil, kill the man, end the war. The Ministry was Hydra-headed. Harry and the Legion assassinated one minister of magic. The Wizengamot appointed another within the hour. They killed a second. The machine adjusted. The laws remained. The power structure held. And Harry learned the bitter truth Hermione had reached years earlier. You cannot kill a system with a wand. Somewhere between raids and funerals, exhaustion and stolen moments of quiet, Harry and Hermione stopped pretending they were only comrades. There was no grand confession. No romantic indulgence. One night, after a long silence broken only by the crackle of warded fire, Hermione leaned into him and he let her. They loved each other the way soldiers did. Fiercely, without illusion, without promises that could not survive the morning. Hermione did not soften. If anything, she became sharper. More decisive, more willing to make choices Harry knew would haunt her. And when he questioned her, when the weight of the dead pressed too heavily, she would meet his eyes without flinching. "If we stop now," she told him once, voice steady despite the blood drying on her sleeve, "then they win. Not today. Not tomorrow. Eventually." Harry believed her. He always had. 7 years had passed since the final battle at Hogwarts. 6 months had passed since Hermione Granger died in a Ministry ambush. Harry arrived too late. He always arrived too late. 6 months since he buried her with no marker and no name, because even in death the Ministry would not allow her to rest in peace. 6 months since the Phoenix Legion looked at him, not as a symbol, not as a hero, but as the last remaining pillar of something that could no longer afford to collapse. Harry did not want leadership. He took it because there was no one else left. Now, standing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, preparing to march on Hogwarts itself, Harry felt the echo of her presence like a phantom limb. This was not the world Hermione had dreamed of, but it was the world she had died trying to change. Harry tightened his grip on his wand. He did not know how history would remember him. He did not know if there would be a future clean enough to justify the blood already spilled. But he knew this. He would finish what Hermione Granger started. Not for vengeance. Not for glory. But because the world she dreamed of would never exist unless someone was willing to burn the old one down and build something better from the ashes. And if that made him a villain, then he would be the villain who made sure her dream lived on. Dennis Creevey came out of the trees like a ghost that had learned how to walk. For a heartbeat, several wands snapped up on instinct. The forest had trained them all to expect ambushes. Harry lifted one hand, not hurried, not sharp, and the legion stilled. Dennis stepped into the clearing and let the torchlight find him. He looked older than he should have, not in years but in damage. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his mouth to his cheekbone, pale and tight, pulling his expression into something permanently severe. Another traced his brow, disappearing into his hairline. His robes were scorched and mended badly, and he carried himself with the careful balance of someone who had learned exactly how far he could push a body before it failed. Harry hadn't seen him in months. Still, he recognized the posture immediately. The Creevey brothers had always stood like that, leaning forward slightly like the world might move faster if they urged it on. Dennis stopped a few steps from Harry and nodded once. "All secret passages are compromised," he said without preamble. His voice was rough, scraped raw by smoke or shouting. "Collapsed, sealed, warded or guarded. Someone's been busy." Harry didn't react outwardly. He already knew what that meant. "How many?" he asked. Dennis huffed a humorless laugh. "Too many. The old smugglers' routes? Gone. The Hogsmeade lines? Burned out. Even the ones Filch never knew about. Someone knew. That would be the Ministry's last contribution before it fell." Harry let his gaze drift past Dennis, toward the black mass of Hogwarts rising beyond the trees. The castle looked wrong tonight. Not under siege, not blazing with spells, but crowded, overfull, alive in a way it hadn't been in any war Harry remembered. Dennis followed his gaze. "They're all inside," Dennis said quietly. "Pure-blood families, Ministry loyalists, their kids, their guards, their house wards. They didn't evacuate." Harry nodded slowly. That too was expected. When Voldemort had waged war, it had been a narrow thing. A private war disguised as a civil one. A handful of ancient families had backed him openly. A handful had opposed him loudly, and most had done what purebloods always did best. They waited. They understood something the world pretended not to, that whether Voldemort won or Dumbledore prevailed, the same names would still sit at the table afterward. The same vaults would still open. The same bloodlines would still decide what was permissible. So they stayed out of it. Tonight was different. Tonight, Hogwarts was full because this war had no acceptable outcome for them. Dennis broke the silence. "They know what this is," he said. "They're not pretending anymore. If they lose, it's not just policy. It's power. It's who writes the laws." "And who they answer to," Harry said. Dennis nodded. "Exactly." The clearing felt tighter suddenly, as if the trees had leaned closer to hear. Behind Harry, someone shifted. A murmur rippled through the Legion. Not fear, but tension sharpening into readiness. Dennis cleared his throat. "There's one passage left." Harry turned back to him fully. "One?" he asked. Dennis nodded. "One. And it's not pretty." "Where does it lead?" Dennis hesitated, just long enough for Harry to notice. The dungeons. A few people swore under their breath. Harry said nothing. Dennis continued. It's old. Pre-foundation old. Goblin-cut stone, half-collapsed, damp enough to rot wards if you breathe wrong. It bypasses the main protections, but it comes up below the castle. No clean exits. No wide halls. In other words, Harry said, a bottleneck. Dennis grimaced. A kill box if they're waiting for us. Harry considered that. He had stood at Hogwarts gates before, rallying defenders, believing the castle was something to be saved at any cost. Now he was choosing how to enter it like an enemy. How many can fit at once? Harry asked. 10. Maybe 12 if you're willing to scrape skin off stone. Harry nodded. And once we're in? No quick path up, Dennis said. Stairs, service tunnels, creature access ways. You'll come up beneath them. Good, Harry said quietly. Dennis frowned. Good. They expect a frontal assault, Harry replied. They expect banners and speeches and dramatic charges through the gates. They've filled the upper levels with bodies because that's where they think power still lives. He looked back toward Hogwarts, eyes hard. They forget what dungeons are for. Dennis studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll take you to it. Harry turned to the Legion. This was the moment. Not a speech, he'd given enough of those, but a decision made visible. The Ministry has fallen, Harry said, voice carrying without force. They lost it when they turned their wands on unarmed people. They lost it when they chose blood over law. No one argued. They've retreated into Hogwarts because they believe tradition will save them, because they believe this castle belongs to them. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. Harry lifted his wand and pointed, not at the castle, but at the ground beneath it. We go through the dungeons, he said. We move quiet. We move controlled. We don't burn the castle unless they force us to. Someone near the back spoke up, voice tight. And if they do? Harry didn't hesitate. Then we let the world see who chose fire. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Dennis stepped closer. You should know, he said quietly, so only Harry could hear. Once we start, they won't see you as liberators. They'll see you as conquerors. Harry met his gaze. They already do. Dennis nodded once, sharply. Right? Then let's get you inside. He turned and began leading them through the trees, toward a path that did not want to be found. As Harry followed, the weight of the night settled into his shoulders. Hogwarts loomed closer with every step, vast and indifferent, filled with people who believed they were defending the world as it should be. Harry touched the cool metal at his throat, the time-turner that no longer turned time, only reminded him of it. This is for you, he thought, not softly, not gently, but with the kind of resolve that did not bend. The passage did not forgive mistakes. It twisted downward like a wound carved into the earth, narrow enough that shoulders brushed stone and cloaks snagged on jagged edges. In places, the ceiling had collapsed entirely, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through rubble slick with moisture and age. Harry felt it immediately. This was not ordinary decay. In stretches of the tunnel, spells simply died. A witch ahead whispered Lumos, and the light flickered once before vanishing, leaving her breath loud in the dark. Another tried Reparo on a shattered brace that threatened to give way, and the magic slid off the broken stone like rain on glass. No good, someone muttered. It won't take. Harry said nothing. He had felt places like this before, spaces so old that magic had no authority over them. Hogwarts had been built atop layers of such things, forgotten and deliberately sealed. The castle remembered more than it revealed. They moved slowly, carefully. Dennis led, scarred face pale in the weak torchlight, guiding them through the only stretches still passable. Behind him, The Legion flowed in disciplined silence, boots placed deliberately, hands steady on wands. At last, the passage widened. Stone gave way to worked walls. The damp smell shifted, replaced by cold air that carried echoes. They had reached the dungeons. Harry stepped out first. The chamber before them was empty. No guards, no ambush. That alone made Harry uneasy. The dungeon corridors stretched away in both directions, torch brackets unlit, shadows clinging thickly to the corners. The silence here was different from the tunnels, expectant, almost polite, as if the castle were waiting to see what they would do. They pulled everyone back, Dennis whispered, left the underlevels quiet. Harry nodded. They always do. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the familiar arches and stonework. He had walked these corridors as a student, unaware of how much of the world liked to pretend that danger only came from the front gates. They'll be hiding, Harry said quietly, watching, waiting for others to bleed. Dennis followed his gaze. Slytherin? He asked. Harry's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. Yes. They moved. The greenish light of the dungeons deepened as they approached the familiar stretch of wall that concealed the Slytherin common room entrance. Harry stopped a few paces back, lifting a hand to signal the Legion to fan out. They think this room makes them untouchable, he said, voice low. They think it's safety. Dennis snorted softly. They forget who built the damn thing. Harry stepped forward. The stone wall loomed before him, blank and impenetrable to anyone else. He drew a breath and spoke. The words flowed from him like something remembered by the bones rather than learned by the mind. Ancient, hissing, intimate. Open. The stone shuddered. A seam appeared, widening with a low, grinding sound as the wall slid aside, revealing the green-lit chamber beyond. He stepped through. The Slytherin common room was exactly as he remembered it, and exactly as he had expected. Green fire burned low in the hearth. Plush chairs were arranged casually around a table littered with bottles and half-filled glasses. Laughter echoed faintly, cut short as the door opened and figures turned in surprise. Theodore Nott froze mid-sip, eyes widening. Draco Malfoy was halfway to standing, confusion flickering across his face as he reached for his wand. They never finished the motion. Spells erupted like a storm breaking. Harry did not shout commands. He did not need to. The Legion moved as one, silent, precise, ruthless. Stunning spells were not used. There would be no prisoners here, no second chances for people who had chosen to sit out every war and reap every victory. Green light shattered glass. Crimson curses tore through furniture. Bodies fell. The room filled with smoke and the sharp smell of burned magic. Screams cut short before they could become pleas. Draco hit the floor hard, fire whiskey spilling across the carpet as a curse took him square in the chest. Nott collapsed beside the hearth, eyes staring, unfinished words dying with him. It was over in seconds. Harry stood amid the wreckage, breathing steady, wand lowered but ready. He surveyed the room with cold efficiency, ensuring no one still twitched, no wand lay unnoticed. Clear, someone said quietly. Harry nodded. They left the common room as they had entered, without ceremony. The stone wall slid shut behind them, sealing away what remained. As they moved back into the dungeon corridors, Harry felt the shift ripple outward. The castle had noticed now. Somewhere above them, alarms would be sounding, spells flaring as defenders scrambled to respond. Good. That should do it, Dennis murmured. They'll feel that. They'll panic, Harry said, and panic makes people look in the wrong direction. He turned to the Legion. "We spread it," he said. "Controlled chaos. Hit the lower halls, the stairwells, the service passages. Loud enough that they can't ignore it." A murmur of acknowledgement ran through the group. "And while they're looking inward," Harry continued, "the rest of the Legion moves across the open ground." Dennis frowned. "That's risky." Harry met his gaze. "So is letting them fortify the gates." He looked up as if he could see through the stone to the grounds beyond, the stretch of open land between the Forbidden Forest and Hogwarts, exposed and lethal under watchful eyes. "They won't expect a charge while the castle's burning from the inside," Harry said. "They'll be too busy trying to save their own." The Legion moved at his signal, splitting into smaller units, slipping away into the dungeon corridors like shadows with purpose. They had known. Every single one of them had known what this was when they followed Harry into the passage. This was not an assault meant for everyone to survive. The passage could not take them all. If too many tried to force it, they would choke it, trap themselves in darkness where magic failed and air turned stale and death came slowly, politely, without witnesses. So the Legion split without argument, the way soldiers did when they trusted the man giving the signal. Some went down with Harry. The rest broke away, into the open halls, into the stairwells and corridors Hogwarts had never been meant to defend from within. First, it was clean. Silent takedowns, Auror stunned before they could cry out, Loyalists bound and disarmed in shadowed alcoves. The Legion moved like a scalpel, not an axe. Then someone panicked. A flare of green shot into the air, burning bright against the ancient stone ceiling. Intruders. The castle roared awake. Footsteps thundered from every direction. Doors burst open. Defensive wards flared, clashing violently with sabotage spells already eating through them. Hogwarts became what it had always pretended it wasn't, a fortress. The Phoenix Legion met them head-on. Spells tore through the halls, lighting tapestries and banners ablaze. Stone shattered. Suits of armor came alive and fell apart again in showers of enchanted metal. Screams echoed, swallowed by the castle's endless staircases. Harry was everywhere. He fought like a man who no longer feared dying. Curses struck him, glancing blows at first, then heavier ones. A cutting hex tore across his shoulder. A stunning spell clipped his ribs hard enough to crack something. A gout of fire washed over his back, burning through cloak and skin alike. He didn't slow. He couldn't. People fell around him, Legion fighters and Ministry loyalists alike, and the floor grew slick with blood and spilled magic. Somewhere above, the castle shook as wards collapsed one by one. Outside, the night exploded. The Phoenix Legion surged from the Forbidden Forest, sprinting across open ground under fire, shields flaring as spells rained down from battlements. It should have been a massacre. It wasn't. The defenders broke. Purebloods who had once sworn they would never kneel dropped their wands and begged for mercy when they realized history was no longer on their side. Families that had hidden through 2 wars surrendered now, understanding too late that neutrality only worked when someone else was doing the killing. The Ministry was falling. Harry felt it even without seeing it, the shift, the sudden slackening of resistance, the way battles turned desperate when one side realized it had already lost. He staggered into a side corridor alone, breathing raggedly, blood soaking his robes. Every step sent pain lancing through his body. His vision blurred at the edges. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for half a second. Not yet, he told himself. Just a little longer. His hand rose to the chain at his neck. The time turner was warm against his skin. Hermione's last gift. She had pressed it into his palm with a tired smile after the Ministry raid, fingers lingering just a moment too long. Insurance, she'd said lightly, in case everything goes wrong. Harry's thumb brushed the hourglass. If he turned it now, just once, he could rejoin the Legion outside. He could lead the final charge himself. He could make sure they didn't break under fire. He could still matter. He lifted it, and the corridor shifted. A figure stepped out of the smoke at the far end, wand already raised. Harry froze. "Neville," he said hoarsely. Neville Longbottom stood tall, robes scorched, jaw set with a fury Harry had rarely seen in him. Gone was the hesitant boy who had once trembled behind friends. "You shouldn't be here," Neville said, voice tight with controlled rage. Harry swallowed. "I do for Hermione." Neville's eyes burned. "I believe in what you're fighting for," he said. "I always have. The Ministry deserved to fall. The system deserved to burn." He took a step forward. "But this," he gestured sharply around them, at the shattered walls and echoing screams, "this is Hogwarts." Harry straightened with effort, blood dripping from his temple. "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly. "That doesn't matter anymore," Neville snapped. "As a professor, it's my duty to protect this castle. And as a friend," his voice cracked for just a second, "it's my duty to stop you." The first spell flew. Neville moved like lightning, raw power crackling through his magic. Vines erupted from the stone, whipping toward Harry with lethal force. Harry countered, blasting them apart, but the recoil sent pain flaring through his injured side. They clashed in the narrow corridor, spells ricocheting violently, stone exploding around them. Neville pressed the attack relentlessly, grief and duty fueling him. Harry could have won. He knew that with cold clarity. If he were whole, if his ribs weren't cracked, if his vision weren't swimming, if his magic weren't bleeding through wounds as fast as he could summon it, he could have ended the fight in seconds. But he wasn't whole. A blasting curse sent him skidding into the wall. He barely got his shield up in time to deflect the next strike. "Neville!" Harry shouted. "This isn't." It struck the time turner. The world shattered. The corridor dissolved. The stone vanished. Color drained out of reality itself as if someone had ripped the page from the book of existence. Harry felt weightless, then falling. The last thing he saw was Neville's horrified face, mouth opening to shout his name. And then there was nothing. Darkness took him before he could breathe again. The time turner lay broken against his chest, its glass shattered, its magic screaming silently into the void. And somewhere time itself recoiled. Pain returned before memory. It seeped in slowly, not as a single wound but as a chorus of aches. Every muscle protesting, every bone reminding him it had once been broken. Harry lay still, breathing shallowly, letting the sensation map itself across his body the way instinct demanded. He was alive. That much was certain. That realization snapped him fully awake. His injuries were knitting together far too smoothly. Not the sharp pull of emergency magic, not the brutal tug of field healing, but something gentler, almost indulgent, as if the damage had been rewound rather than repaired. No, he thought dimly. No. He opened his eyes. Corridor. He sucked in a breath and immediately regretted it. His ribs complained, but the pain was already receding, dulled at the edges like something unfinished. Harry pushed himself up onto one elbow. A boy stood several feet away, frozen mid-step, clutching something metallic in his hands. He had round cheeks, soft features, and a mop of hair that refused to behave. He stared at Harry like he'd just walked in on a ghost. They locked eyes. Harry's heart began to race. Neville Longbottom. Too young. Far too young. This Neville had no scars on his face, no weight in his posture. He looked like a student who still believed most problems could be solved by blending into the shadow. Neville was the first to recover. "Oh," he blurted. Sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought. He gestured vaguely at Harry, then at the corridor, then at the stone wall behind him. I forgot my omnioculars, Neville explained quickly, words tumbling over each other. For the task. Professor Sprout said I could run back, since everyone's at the lake and… He trailed off, frowning. You're hurt, Neville said, stating the obvious. Harry swallowed. He knew this corridor. This was where Neville had stood against him, older, furious, righteous, where spells had shattered stone and time itself had broken. But now the castle was quiet. Empty. Because it was the day of the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. Harry forced his breathing to steady. I'm fine, he said automatically. His voice sounded wrong to his own ears. Too young, too unscarred by years of command and loss. Neville eyed him skeptically. You're bleeding, he said, pointing. Harry looked down. His robes were torn, darkened in places where blood had soaked through, though the wounds beneath were already sealing. It looked bad, far worse than it felt. Neville shifted his weight, clearly unsure what to do. You're not, Neville began, hesitating. You're not a student, are you? Harry shook his head. Neville relaxed slightly. I thought so. He squinted. Are you here to watch the tournament? Because if you are, you really picked a strange place to. I got lost, Harry said quickly. It wasn't even a lie. Neville nodded, clearly relieved to have an explanation. Right? That happens. The castle does that sometimes. He hesitated again, then asked, Do you need help? Madame Pomfrey's at the lake. But I could, I don't know, get a professor. Harry's mind raced. If Neville fetched someone now, Snape, McGonagall, Dumbledore. No, not yet. I just need a minute, Harry said. I'll be gone before anyone notices. Neville frowned. You really shouldn't be wandering around bleeding. Harry met his eyes. Neville flinched, not in fear, but in instinctive unease. Something in Harry's gaze didn't fit. Not threatening. Just old. Oh, Neville said quietly. All right, I'll leave you be then. He took a step back, then paused. For what it's worth, Neville added, awkward but sincere. If you came to watch the tournament, I hope you still get to see the task. It's supposed to be really something. Harry nodded slowly. Neville blinked, clearly unsure what to do, then shrugged it off. Good luck, he said, and hurried past Harry toward the stairwell, muttering about omnioculars and Jasmine under his breath. Harry waited until Neville was gone, until the corridor was silent again. Then he sagged back against the wall, heart pounding. The time turner is still around his neck, broken. Harry's gaze dropped to the floor. His wand lay there, half hidden in shadow where it had skidded when he fell. He reached for it slowly, fingers closing around familiar wood, and felt the quiet reassurance settle into his bones. Blackthorn. Dragon heartstring. Not his first wand. That one had died screaming. He remembered the snap clearly. The sharp, careless crack when the Aurors had taken him, hands rough, voices righteous. They had broken it in front of him, not out of necessity but out of message. This is what happens when we decide you're inconvenient. By the time Hermione and the Phoenix Legion tore him out of that cell, there had been nothing left to repair. This wand had come later. Custom-built by French wizard. Balanced for power that did not need to announce itself. A wand made for a man who understood restraint as well as violence. Harry flexed his fingers around it, testing the weight. The wand responded immediately, a faint pulse of recognition traveling up his arm. Good, he murmured. You're still with me. He straightened, then frowned as his cloak shifted awkwardly around his legs. Too long, too heavy. The fabric pooled at his feet like a reminder of everything that no longer fit. Idiot, he thought dryly. Anyone else would have noticed. Then again, Neville had been nervous, distracted, running on excitement and adolescent urgency. He'd seen an injured stranger, not a walking paradox. Harry lifted his wand. A flick, a whispered charm. The cloak shrank smoothly, the fabric drawing inward until it settled perfectly against his shoulders, fitting his smaller frame as though it had always been meant for it. The weight redistributed. The folds fell right. Better. He exhaled slowly and leaned his head back against the cold stone wall. Time travel. Hermione had warned him about it. Lectured, really, with diagrams and timelines and increasingly aggressive hand gestures. You cannot let your past self see you, she'd said. Not talk to you, not glimpse you, not even sense you. Temporal resonance is unpredictable, Harry. It's not like normal magic. He'd nodded at the time. Pretended he understood. Of course, it had gone straight out of his head the moment it mattered. Harry pinched the bridge of his nose. All right, he muttered. No more mistakes. The castle was still quiet. Everyone would be at the lake, eyes fixed on champions and mere-people and spectacles designed to distract. Hogwarts had always loved pageantry. It was one of the reasons people forgot what lurked beneath. Harry pushed away from the wall and began to walk. He knew Hogwarts the way soldiers knew terrain, by memory written in muscle and instinct. Service staircases, blind corners, shortcuts behind tapestries that no student ever thought to check. Routes that avoided portraits. Routes that avoided people. He slipped through corridors that would soon echo with gossip and panic and war, but now lay untouched, preserved in a moment of fragile peace. As he moved, the weight of what he'd lost, and what he'd regained, settled over him. Hermione was alive. Not a martyr, somewhere in this castle or near it. She was brilliant and stubborn and furious about injustice she hadn't yet been crushed by. The Phoenix Legion didn't exist. The Ministry still stood unchallenged. The future he had burned himself alive to create had been erased. Harry paused at a window overlooking the grounds. Far below, the Black Lake glittered, distant cheers carrying faintly on the wind. He rested a hand against the glass, expression unreadable. I won't let it end the same way, he said quietly. Then he turned away. Harry slipped out of Hogwarts the way he always had, without permission, without announcement, and without leaving a trace anyone would notice until it was far too late. The castle did not stop him. It never had. Harry looked young. Beneath the scarred skin and smaller frame lived the same man the Ministry of Magic had once whispered about in locked rooms and classified reports. The wizard they feared more than any Dark Lord because he did not cloak his violence in ideology or blood purity. Voldemort had believed in hierarchy. Grindelwald had believed in vision. Every dark wizard before him had drawn lines. Purebloods here, others there, limits that made their cruelty selective. Harry Potter had never cared for such distinctions. And if the world demanded change, then it would be bought the only way it ever truly was. He could feel the difference now. The magic inside him was muted, thinner, like a vast ocean forced through a narrow channel. His adult reserves, the crushing weight of power that once bent rooms around him, were gone. This body couldn't hold it. Not yet. But knowledge? Knowledge did not diminish with muscle or bone. Every spell, every technique, every dirty, efficient trick he had learned while fighting ministries, monsters, and men who believed themselves untouchable, those remained etched into him more deeply than scars. And knowledge was far more dangerous than raw strength. By the time he reached Hogsmeade, the cheers from the Black Lake had faded into background noise. The village was mostly empty, shutters drawn, residents gathered near the school or pretending not to care what happened beyond the wards. Harry didn't slow. He turned away from the road, toward the hills beyond, toward the place Sirius Black had once hidden like a hunted animal, watching a castle he loved from a distance. A long trek for anyone else. For Harry, it took seconds. Magic coiled around him. In a cloud of darkened smoke, he rose. He flew low and fast, hugging the terrain, invisible to the casual eye, the smoke dispersing behind him like breath in cold air. Hogwarts rose in the distance, familiar and infuriating, exactly as it always was before it broke people. The cave sat where he remembered it. Hidden, sheltered, overlooking everything without being seen. Harry landed silently at its mouth and let the smoke dissolve. Firelight flickered inside. The smell hit him first. Burning feathers, fat, charred meat. Sirius Black crouched over a small open fire, turning a half-plucked bird on a sharpened stick. His movements were stiff like someone rationing energy. His hair hung lank around his face, too long, too dull. His cheeks were hollow, skin stretched tight over bone. Malnutrition clung to him like a second skin. He looked wrong. Harry's chest tightened. The last time he had seen Sirius, truly seen him, he had been different. Healthier. His hair had fallen just right again, black and untamed but clean. His face had filled out, the handsome angles returned like a memory reclaimed. His eyes, still haunted, always haunted, had smiled anyway. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because he had finally been allowed to live despite it. That Sirius was gone here. This Sirius was still trapped in the in-between. So he turned away. He let the magic coil around him again, silent and dense, and rose into the air without a sound. The smoke swallowed him as he pulled back, giving himself only one last look. Just to be sure. Just to remember. Then he flew, fast, low and unseen, away from the cave and back toward Hogsmeade. Harry slipped in unnoticed. The enchanted trunk is still in his pocket. Inside were emergency funds siphoned from accounts that hadn't been created yet, provisions packed for sieges that never happened, and supplies meant to keep people alive when hope ran thin. He opened it in a narrow alley and worked quickly. Food first. He bought bread, real bread, meat preserved with careful charms, cheese, fruit, dried rations that would keep, nutrient potions, subtle ones, not flashy, designed to rebuild without shocking a starved body, clean water skins, a small warming charm wrapped carefully around the bundle. He paid in coins no one questioned. Then the Ollery. The building smelled of feathers and ink and impatience. Harry selected for strong owls, old enough to carry weight, smart enough not to ask questions. He packed the parcels evenly, bound them together with reinforced charms, and attached a simple destination spell, one he knew Sirius's wards wouldn't reject. Last came the note. Harry stared at the parchment longer than he meant to. He kept it short. Eat well, gather strength. Nothing else. Except. He paused, quill hovering. Then carefully he wrote the name. Helios. The name Sirius had once mentioned offhandedly, years ago, with a crooked grin and a distant look in his eyes. If I ever have a son, Sirius had said, I think I'd name him Helios. Son's got a nice defiant ring to it, don't you think? Harry swallowed. He sealed the note, tied it securely, and stepped back as the owls launched themselves into the sky, wings beating hard as they carried the weight away toward the hills. Fly safe, he murmured. London felt different. Harry couldn't tell whether that was because the city itself had changed, or because he had. He stood near the edge of a busy street, hands tucked into the pockets of his cloak, watching red buses thunder past and people surge along the pavement with a purpose that had nothing to do with prophecies or wars. The air smelled of rain and petrol and something fried from a nearby shop. It was loud, chaotic, alive. He had passed through London as a boy, of course. But he had never really been here. Back then, he had been obedient. The thought surfaced unexpectedly, sharp enough to make him pause. He had followed instructions without questioning them. When Dumbledore suggested, he complied. When adults told him where to stay, what to do, whom to trust, he listened. Always. Harry didn't know when that had started, or why he had never questioned it. Dumbledore had been his headmaster. Nothing more. He hadn't trained Harry, hadn't prepared him for war, hadn't sat him down and taught him how to survive the things the world kept throwing at him. He hadn't given Harry special protection or guidance. Only house points and gentle words and the expectation that Harry would somehow manage. And Harry had. He had stayed where he was told to stay. He had gone where he was told to go. He had accepted confinement as wisdom and isolation as necessity because someone older and supposedly wiser had suggested it. Why didn't I ever ask why? He wondered now. The question had no comfortable answer. As a child, he had been grateful for any direction at all. After the cupboard, after the neglect, being told what to do had felt like safety. But it had also meant he never explored. Never wandered. Never learned the world on his own terms. The Muggle world, especially, had remained distant, something he observed through car windows or train platforms, something he passed through on the way to somewhere else. He had never lingered long enough to notice how fast it moved. Until the Phoenix Legion. Until running had become a way of life. He had slept in abandoned flats, train stations, warehouses, safe houses hidden in the cracks of cities that never stopped growing. He had watched the Muggle world change rapidly, technology advancing at a pace that magic struggled to match. Screens everywhere, machines that connected people across continents in seconds. In his own time, the Muggle world had begun to resemble the magical one, not in spellwork, but in power, influence, reach. Standing here now, younger and smaller and stripped of the future he had lived through, Harry felt that same disquieting familiarity. This world doesn't need us, he thought, not the way we think. He turned down a quieter street, pulling his cloak tighter as the city's noise dulled into a constant hum. He didn't have a place to go. Not really. There were no safe houses yet, no Legion contacts, no Hermione quietly arranging logistics 3 steps ahead of him. There was only one place he could stay. Grimmauld Place. The irony almost made him laugh. He knew Sirius wouldn't arrive there until after the Triwizard Tournament ended, after the world shifted just enough to let Sirius breathe again. Until then, the house would remain empty, sealed, brooding. Perfect. Harry slipped into a narrow alley and murmured a charm under his breath, the air folding around him as he apparat carefully, deliberately, in front of the familiar door of number 12. The door creaked open with protest, as if number 12 Grimmauld Place resented being disturbed. Dust billowed outward in a choking cloud, thick enough to sting Harry's eyes. The smell hit him a heartbeat later. Old magic, rot, damp stone, and something sharp and bitter that clung to the back of the throat. Spiders scattered across the walls and floor, retreating into massive webs that stretched from banister to ceiling like abandoned siege works. Harry stood still in the doorway, taking it in. For a moment, he thought he was misremembering. He had seen Grimmauld Place at its worst, or so he had believed. Back then, it had felt oppressive, angry, choked with the weight of generations who had loved cruelty more than each other. But this was something else. This wasn't merely neglected. This was abandoned. He stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him with a hollow thud that echoed through the entryway. The sound stirred more movement, skittering legs, whispering silk as webs shifted. "So this is what you really looked like," Harry murmured. In his other life, when he had first entered this house with Sirius, it had already been scrubbed, warded, restrained. Someone, likely Lupin, Tonks, Molly, had worked tirelessly to make it habitable, to make it look merely unpleasant instead of unlivable. Looking at it now, Harry understood just how much effort that must have taken. This place had not wanted to be clean. Harry raised his wand. Evanesco! The spell rolled out smoothly, controlled. Dust vanished in wide swathes, cobwebs unraveling and dissolving as if they had never existed. He advanced slowly, clearing as he went, the air growing fresher with every step. Still, the house felt watchful. He moved through the hallway, his thoughts drifting despite himself. What now? There was no version of the future where he stayed away from the magical world. That had never been an option, not even when he'd tried. And staying away from Hermione, his jaw tightened. That would be worse. She hadn't wanted distance even in the future. Not when it mattered. Not when it hurt. And now, knowing she was here, alive, brilliant, unbroken, pretending she didn't exist felt like tearing open an old wound and calling it discipline. He banished another layer of grime, the floorboards groaning softly beneath his feet. "I should have listened to you more," he muttered, not sure whether he meant Hermione or his younger self. The thought barely finished forming before magic lashed out. Harry twisted instinctively, the curse slicing past where his head had been a second earlier and scorching the wall behind him. Stone cracked, blackened. He didn't even raise his wand fully before he saw it. A small, twisted figure stood at the base of the staircase, eyes blazing, thin fingers curled around a knot of concentrated magic. Its ears twitched violently, its mouth pulled back in a snarl that bared sharp little teeth. "Thieves," it hissed. "Burglars in the house of the most ancient and noble house of Black. You will not. Stop!" Harry's voice cut through the air like a blade. Creature froze. Not staggered or hesitated. Frozen. Its arm locked mid-motion, magic still writhing in its hand like a trapped serpent. Its body trembled, eyes widening in shock. "How," it wailed. "How did you?" "Shut up." The words landed with absolute authority. The magic in the creature hand dissipated instantly. Its mouth snapped shut so hard its teeth clicked together. Tried to speak again. "Shut up." Silence. The house elf stared at Harry, terror and confusion warring across its face. Slowly, Harry lowered his wand. "Go upstairs," he said calmly. "Start cleaning. Properly this time." The elf's body jerked as if pulled by invisible strings. "Yes, Lord," it croaked, voice breaking. It vanished with a sharp crack, leaving the staircase empty. Harry stood there for a long moment, heart steady, mind racing. "Lord." He lifted his left hand. First, he saw nothing. Then, as if responding to his attention, something shimmered into view. A faint golden glow coalescing around his finger. A ring, ancient and heavy with magic, revealing itself only because it chose to. The Black family ring. Recognition hit him like a blow. "I'm still Lord Black," Harry whispered. That made no sense. In this time, Sirius is alive. Wrongly accused, hunted, but alive. By every law of inheritance Harry knew, Sirius should have been the rightful lord. And yet, the house had obeyed him. The elf had recognized him. The ring had answered. Harry flexed his fingers slowly, feeling the immense, quiet weight of authority settle around him like a mantle he had never truly put down. He didn't know how it was possible. He didn't know what loophole, what ancient magic, what cruel twist of fate had allowed this to happen. But he understood one thing immediately. This changed everything. Power like this wasn't just symbolic. It meant access, vaults, wards, records, contracts written in magic far older than the ministry itself. It meant leverage in a world that pretended laws were neutral while enforcing bloodline privilege at every turn. Harry's lips curved into something sharp and thoughtful. "All right," he murmured to the silent house. "Let's see what I can do with this." The chandelier above flickered, as if Grimmauld Place itself were listening. Grimmauld Place did not sleep. The house creaked and sighed around Harry as he sat alone in the drawing room. Fire lit low, dust mostly banished but the air still heavy with memory. The curtains remained half-drawn, the street outside reduced to a blur of lamplight and passing shadows. The black house watched him think. And Harry needed to think. Time travel, Hermione had said, was not neat. If you crossed your own path, if your past self saw you, sensed you, even brushed against your magic, you would feel it. A pull, a resonance, a fracture, something unmistakable. Harry felt nothing. No echo. No sense of another him moving through the world. Which meant one of two things. Either he had not crossed his own path yet, or he never would. That realization unsettled him more than he liked to admit. He leaned back in the chair, staring into the fire, letting thoughts drift where they would. Viktor Krum crossed his mind briefly, unbidden. The absurdity of it almost made him snort. Krum had been famous long before Hogwarts, Quidditch star known across Europe, and Harry remembered very clearly Krum's fascination with Hermione. No, not Viktor Krum. There was no one else either. No mysterious stranger who tried to be closer to Hermione. No older wizard whose presence had ever made something inside him stir with recognition. Because there couldn't be. Harry Potter could not exist twice in the same world. Not openly. And Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the symbol, the convenient martyr, had already been claimed by history in this timeline. There was no room for another version of him walking around asking questions. He would need a new skin, a new story, a new name. The answer came not as inspiration, but as inevitability. Lord Black. Harry closed his eyes briefly. Sirius was chaos wrapped in charm. Reckless, brilliant, infuriatingly alive. A man who had enjoyed his youth with enthusiasm and very little restraint. Harry had heard the stories, half-joking, half-embarrassed confessions told late at night over fire whiskey. And Azkaban had taken the rest. Dementors did not just drain joy. They hollowed memory. They tore context apart, left fragments floating without anchors. Sirius himself had admitted there were entire stretches of his life he could no longer clearly recall. Faces without names, nights without endings. Which made the lie elegant. Plausible. Harry straightened slowly. A lost son. A child conceived in youth, never known, never claimed. A woman who disappeared during the war. Muggle-born, perhaps, or foreign, or simply unimportant enough that no one bothered to look for her. A child raised away from Britain, away from wizarding politics. And then, the escape from Azkaban. The headlines, the panic. Sirius Black, fugitive and alleged mass murderer. That would be the catalyst. The moment a hidden life was forced into motion. I came because I heard my father broke out of Azkaban. Powerful, simple, difficult to disprove. And most importantly, it let Harry get close to Sirius. Not as Harry Potter. Not as the godson who carried prophecy and expectation of the wizarding world. But as Helios Black. Helios the son. Lost son of Sirius Black. arrived in England after news of the escape. Curious, looking for answers, looking for a father he had never known. Harry exhaled slowly. Sirius already had a godson. The world did not need another Harry Potter. But a son? A son was different. A son explained proximity, loyalty, and Sirius, reckless, guilt-ridden, desperate for something to anchor himself, would believe it, would want to believe it. Harry stared into the fire, eyes hard, calculating. "I will love him like a father and protect him from everyone," he murmured, "and I won't destroy him with the truth either." Deciding to become Helios Black was the easy part. Doing it properly was something else entirely. Harry sat at the long, scarred table in Grimmauld Place with Hermione's journals spread open before him, parchment layered atop parchment, margins filled with her precise, relentless handwriting. Candlelight flickered across diagrams he knew by heart, circles within circles, names annotated with dates and cross-references, warnings underlined twice. "Blood adoption is not symbolism," Hermione had written, hard enough that the quill had nearly torn the page. "It is not." Harry rubbed his eyes. If he was going to be Sirius Black's son, it couldn't be a story alone. Not with the Black family wards. Not with house elves, rings, vaults, and blood-tuned protections. Words would fail the first time magic was asked a question. He needed blood to answer. 2 rituals, both illegal, both erased from British libraries, both punishable by life imprisonment or worse. Blood adoption. Magical signature rewriting. The first would bind him into the House of Black through blood, not as a ward, but as issue. The second would ensure that every detection charm, every ancestral ward, every piece of magic that tasted him would read Black, not Potter. Not Harry. Helios. Harry leaned back slowly. No one in Britain would perform them. Ritual magic had been hunted nearly to extinction, not because it was inherently dark, but because it did not answer to authority. You could not regulate a circle drawn in blood and will. You could not tax an oath sworn to the bones of the world. The ministry feared what it could not license, which meant Harry knew exactly who he needed. Albert Hemlock. The name sat heavy in his chest. Hemlock had been old when Harry first met him in the future, ancient, really, his back bent, hands trembling, eyes sharp as broken glass. He had been the Phoenix Legion's healer, though healer barely covered it. He worked with poultices, runes, chants older than wandwork, rituals designed to correct rather than suppress. He had been imprisoned in Azkaban for one reason. He practiced ritual magic. The Hemlock family curse was documented quietly, a blood curse laid generations ago, sophisticated and cruel. Every Hemlock who lived past 50 lost their mind. Rage, paranoia, hallucinations. Some turned violent, others simply vanished into themselves. Albert Hemlock had watched it claim his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. He had turned to ritual magic not for power, but for survival. The ministry had called it experimental dark practices. Hermione had called it desperation. Harry's fingers tightened on the page. In the future, Hermione had broken the curse. She had dismantled the bloodline curse piece by piece, traced it back to its origin, and rewrote it, freeing every living Hemlock in one night. Sane, whole. Albert Hemlock had wept. Then he had followed her anywhere she asked. Harry knew the timeline. By the end of his 5th year, Albert Hemlock would be arrested, dragged away from Hemlock Manor, thrown into Azkaban to rot alongside criminals and monsters because the ministry did not know how to categorize a man who refused to stop trying to save his family. Which meant Harry closed the journal. Right now, Albert Hemlock was still free, still at the manor, still surrounded by family members who feared their own birthdays. Still desperate enough to listen, Harry stood. "All right," he murmured to the empty house. "Let's go steal a healer." Hemlock Manor did not announce itself. It lay folded into the countryside like a wound that had never healed, wards heavy and uneven, magic clinging to the land with the brittle tension of something strained too far for too long. The air tasted wrong the moment Harry stepped onto the grounds. Fear had weight. He felt it in the way the wards pressed against his skin, testing, tasting, hesitating. He followed the gravel path to the house. Inside, the atmosphere was worse. Whispers echoed down hallways that should have been empty. A man laughed somewhere, too loudly, too suddenly. A woman sobbed in a room with the door locked from the outside. Harry moved through it all without flinching. He found Albert Hemlock in a study that smelled of dried herbs, ink, and exhaustion. The old wizard sat hunched at a desk littered with scrolls, his white hair thin and uncombed, fingers ink-stained and shaking as they traced a diagram that Harry recognized instantly. A stabilization circle. Unfinished. Hemlock looked up sharply. "Who are you?" he snapped. "I don't take visitors." Harry closed the door behind him. "You will," he said calmly. "For me." Hemlock's eyes narrowed. "You have 5 seconds before I curse you into a chair." Harry reached into his trunk and placed a single journal on the desk. "Hermione's." "What's this?" he whispered. Harry met his gaze. "From the woman who can break your curse." Silence slammed down like a dropped blade. Hemlock's breath stuttered. "That's not possible." Harry leaned forward. "You could to see your whole family break from the curse." Hemlock's hands began to shake violently. "You're lying." Harry opened the journal to a marked page. Hemlock read, then sank back in his chair as if his legs had given out. "How? Someone figured it out," he breathed. "I never saw. Who is this woman?" "She is someone who is going to change the world," Harry said simply. Hemlock looked up at him, eyes suddenly sharp despite the tremor in his hands. "Who are you?" Harry did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed his left hand on the desk and let the ring reveal itself. Hemlock sucked in a breath. "A black," he whispered. "Not yet," Harry said, "but I will be after a blood adoption ritual." Hemlock laughed, a broken, incredulous sound. "Blood adoption?" he asked hoarsely. "In Britain? You might as well ask me to summon the old gods on the ministry steps." "I know it's illegal," Harry said. "I know it's dangerous, but you will do it for the sake of your family." Hemlock stared at him for a long moment. "You want to be a black by blood," Hemlock said. "Then you'll do it properly. No half measures." Harry nodded. "Good," Hemlock said grimly. "Then sit down, boy, and start by telling me why you need to become someone else to survive." Harry sat and began to tell the backstory he created, but honestly enough to matter. Nocturne Alley breathed like a living thing. Harry stepped into it without hesitation. Cloak pulled close, presence deliberately sharpened. The alley reacted immediately. Shadows deepened, whispers hushed, eyes tracked him from behind cracked windows and hanging signs. This was a place that understood intent. Harry had a list folded neatly in his pocket. 2 rituals. No substitutes. No compromises. Hemlock's handwriting covered the parchment. Ingredients marked, sources annotated, margins filled with blunt instructions. Do not accept second-grade reagents. Intimidate if necessary. If they smile too much, leave. Harry followed it to the letter. The first shopkeeper, a hunched wizard with yellowed eyes, tried to palm off a diluted blood resin. Harry didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned closer and let a thread of magic coil around the man's wrist, tight enough to make the point without drawing attention. "First quality," Harry said calmly, "or I take your stock and your fingers." The resin was replaced without another word. In the next shop, he rejected powdered moonbone that had been cut with chalk. In another, he inspected pure silver himself, snapping it cleanly to test purity. Every time, the same pattern followed: hesitation, fear, compliance. By the end, his trunk was heavy with power. Ritual chalk harvested under specific stars. Blood ink preserved in stasis. Black candles etched with sigils that predated wand magic. Vessels, blades, threads, seals. Everything was catalogued, stored, protected. Harry considered Gringotts briefly as he sealed the trunk. Then dismissed the thought. Not yet. Goblins were loyal to one thing only: leverage. They remembered every secret ever entrusted to them, and they sold memory as easily as gold when the price was right. Until the rituals were complete, until he was truly black, he would not step into their halls. After Nocturne Alley, Diagon Alley felt almost unreal. Too bright, too clean. Harry moved through it like a ghost among shoppers, buying quietly nutritional potions, preservation charms, preserved food. He avoided attention, paid in coin, and left before anyone could decide to remember his face. At the Ollery, he prepared the parcel with care. Food packed tightly, potions cushioned, wards layered to survive weather, pursuit, and suspicion. The note was short. "Stay safe. Be strong." Signed only, Helios. The owls launched into the sky, wings beating hard as they carried the weight away toward the hills. Harry watched them until they vanished. The cave was quiet when the owls arrived. Sirius Black had learned to live in that quiet, the kind that pressed in on your ears, broken only by the crackle of fire or the distant call of something hunting. He sat near the entrance, back against stone, wand within reach, expecting Aurors at any moment. Instead, he got owls. 4 of them. They landed awkwardly, talons scraping rock, parcels thudding softly at his feet before they took off again without waiting. Sirius stared. He checked for curses first, old habit, sharp instinct, then carefully opened the bundle. The smell hit him immediately. Real food, just like last time. His stomach twisted painfully. "Merlin," he breathed. He found the note tucked between packets and unfolded it with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. "Stay safe. Be strong." Signed, Helios. The name echoed in his head, sudden and sharp. Helios. He whispered it aloud before he realized he was doing it. Helios. The fire crackled. His brow furrowed as something old stirred, memory without context, emotion without anchor. He rubbed a hand over his face, breathing slowly. That's strange," he muttered. The name felt familiar. Too familiar. He stared into the fire, eyes unfocused, and then, unbidden, the thought surfaced. "Helios Alfred Black," Sirius murmured. The words slipped out like they had been waiting. His heart stuttered. Alfred. Uncle Alfred, the only one who had ever given a damn. The one who had left him everything when the rest of the family had already written him off as a disgrace. The name he had once thought he might give a son, if he ever had one. Sirius shook his head sharply, as if that might dislodge the thought. "Pull yourself together," he told himself hoarsely. But even as he ate, slowly, carefully, savoring each bite like it might vanish, his mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. Who is this Helios? Why is he sending him food? The cave was quiet in the way only exhaustion could buy, no restless shifting. Sirius lay wrapped in a thin blanket near the dying embers of the fire, breath slow and even, body finally giving in after food, warmth, and days of relentless vigilance. Harry stood at the edge of the cave and watched him for a long moment. He had not come here to talk. He had come because blood did not wait. Fresh blood mattered. Ritual magic was cruel that way, precise and unforgiving. Harry drew his hood deeper and stepped closer, every movement controlled, silent. Sirius did not stir. Harry crouched beside him, heart steady despite the intimacy of it. Up close, Sirius looked worse than he had allowed himself to notice earlier. Cheekbones too sharp, lips cracked, skin drawn tight with hunger and stress. You deserved better, Harry thought, not for the first time. He raised his wand. A whisper-soft charm slid over Sirius like a second sleep, deeper, heavier, merciful. Harry waited, counting breaths, until even subconscious resistance faded. Then he worked. The blade he used was ritual silver, thin and narrow, etched with containment runes so fine they were nearly invisible. He pricked Sirius's palm with surgical precision, just enough to draw blood without pain. 3 drops fell into a waiting vial, glowing faintly as the runes sealed them. Next, the hair. 3 strands carefully selected, long enough, untouched by fire or blood or wandwork. Harry severed them cleanly, bound them with red thread, and slipped them into a second vial. Throughout it all, Sirius slept on, unaware that his blood had just agreed to something it had never been asked before. Harry stood, backing away slowly. "Forgive me," he whispered, "not because the act was wrong, but if the truth come out later and it would hurt." He left the cave as he had entered, unseen, unremembered. Hemlock Manor was waiting. The wards recognized him instantly this time, parting like curtains drawn aside for a long-expected guest. The old house thrummed with power, its stones etched with preparation and intent. Candles burned low but steady, their flames dark and unwavering. Albert Hemlock stood at the center of the ritual chamber, sleeves rolled, hands already stained with ink and blood. He did not look up as Harry entered. "You're on time," the old wizard said hoarsely. "The blood is fresh," Harry replied, holding out the vials. Hemlock took them reverently, inspecting the seals, nodding once in approval. "Good. That gives us one chance. If we fail, the magic will recoil. You will not survive a second attempt." Harry stepped into the outer circle without hesitation. "What about Sirius?" he asked. Hemlock's mouth twitched. "He will feel nothing tonight." Harry nodded. "That's acceptable." Hemlock looked at him sharply. "This is not adoption in the sentimental sense," he warned. "This will rewrite you, your magic, your signature, your inheritance lines." "I know," Harry said. The old wizard studied him for a long moment. "You are not doing this for gold or power," Hemlock said quietly. "No," Harry replied. "I'm doing it because it's necessary." He raised his staff and struck the stone once. The ritual circle ignited. Runes flared to life beneath Harry's feet, ancient symbols crawling with power, older than Hogwarts itself. Blood was added. Hair burned. Names were spoken, not shouted, not declared, but acknowledged. Hemlock's voice filled the chamber, low and relentless. Harry felt it then, the pull, the pressure, the sensation of something vast turning its attention toward him. His magic flared instinctively, fighting, resisting, then settling, accepting. Pain lanced through him, not sharp, but deep, like his bones were being rewritten from the inside out. His chest burned. His left hand throbbed as the invisible ring blazed with sudden, undeniable heat. Harry clenched his jaw and did not scream. Hemlock slammed his staff down a final time. "Done," he rasped. The runes dimmed. The candles guttered. Harry dropped to one knee, breath coming hard, sweat soaking his clothes. Hemlock stepped forward, steadying him with surprising strength. "It's finished," the old wizard said softly. "Helios Alfred Black." The name echoed. Harry lifted his head slowly. He felt different. As if a door that had always been closed had finally decided to recognize him. Harry rose unsteadily. "Thank you," he said. Hemlock nodded. "Go. Before the magic finishes settling. The first sunrise matters." Harry turned toward the door. Behind him, Albert Hemlock murmured, almost to himself, "Merlin helped them all, and the world would soon have to learn what it meant to welcome a new Black." The mirror was filthy. No amount of cleaning charms had ever truly touched it. Harry could tell at a glance. The glass was clouded with age rather than dirt, its surface warped just enough to distort the edges of whatever it reflected. Grimmauld Place did not believe in perfection. It believed in endurance. Harry stood before it anyway. The reflection staring back at him was unfamiliar. Not wrong. Just not him. His hair, once stubbornly untamed in the careless way of youth, now fell in dark, heavy waves, curling naturally no matter how he brushed it. It framed his face the way Sirius's once had, wild, defiant, unmistakably black. His eyes caught his attention next. The emerald green was gone. In its place was a lighter green, sharper, colder, and within it flickered faint violet sparks, catching the light when he shifted his head. Blood magic that had rewritten more than contracts and wards. His chin had changed too, the line more defined, the angle subtly altered. There were still echoes of Harry Potter there, if someone knew where to look, if they wanted to see him. But most wouldn't. Most would see what the world expected to see. Someone else. Harry, Helios, lifted a hand and pressed his fingers against the cold glass. He didn't flinch. "I don't recognize you," he said softly. The mirror, ancient and uncaring, reflected him without comment. And that was fine. Recognition had never been what kept him alive. He straightened slowly, feeling the way his magic sat differently now. No longer sprawling and volatile, but coiled, dense, disciplined, less explosive, more dangerous. The ritual had taken something from him. It had also given him something back. Choice. He could not sit idle. Not while wars brewed in the dark. Not while people he loved walked blindly toward battles they did not yet understand. Time travel had rules. Hermione had explained them carefully, patiently, lovingly. But Harry no longer cared. Rules had never saved anyone. Prophecies had never protected the innocent. And the role he had been forced to play, Harry Potter, savior, symbol, poster boy of the so-called light, had only ever been a convenient lie the world told itself. He turned away from the mirror. "I'm done being that," he said quietly. Grimmauld Place creaked in response, the sound low and approving. He was no longer the boy the light had shaped. He was Helios Black, heir to one of the darkest, most ancient magical families in Europe, a name that carried weight, fear, and access to things the Ministry pretended did not exist. If the world was going to burn itself down again, he would decide where the fire went. Helios pulled his cloak around his shoulders and stepped into the shadows of the house, already planning his next move. 2 days changed everything. Not the world. London still moved at the same impatient pace. Diagon Alley still bustled with noise and color. But him. The ritual had finished settling into his bones, his magic no longer flaring unpredictably, his presence no longer tugging at old recognitions. For the first time since waking in the past, Harry did not need to hide. He walked through Diagon Alley openly, hood down, cloak resting naturally on his shoulders. No whispers followed him, no double takes, no sudden hush that always seemed to fall around Harry Potter like a curse. It was liberating. Gringotts rose ahead of him, white stone gleaming beneath the sun, dragons carved into its facade frozen in eternal threat. The building had not changed. It never did. Gringotts existed outside fashion, outside sentiment, outside loyalty. Exactly as it always had. Helios stepped inside. The air cooled instantly, heavy with the scent of metal, old parchment, and something sharper, calculation. Goblins moved with brisk efficiency behind long counters, claws clicking against coin and ledger alike. Their eyes flicked toward him and away again. No recognition. Good. That meant the magic had taken. Helios approached a side counter where a goblin sat meticulously counting stacks of coins, thin fingers moving faster than any human's. The goblin did not look up until Helios stopped directly before him. Yes? The goblin snapped, irritation clear. If you are here to exchange. Helios lifted his left hand. The black family ring revealed itself instantly, gold darkened by age, sigils crawling faintly along its surface like sleeping serpents. I require access to my vault, Helios said calmly. House of Black. The goblin's fingers froze mid-count. Slowly, very slowly, it looked up. Its eyes narrowed, pupils sharpening to slits as it studied the ring. Then Helios's face. Then the ring again. Goblins did not read faces the way humans did. They read claims, contracts, proof, and blood. State your name, the goblin said, tone no longer dismissive. Helios Alfred Black, he replied without hesitation. The goblin hissed softly through its teeth. Interesting, it murmured. It reached beneath the counter and withdrew a thin metal instrument, pressing it briefly against the ring. The sigils flared once, sharp and definitive. The goblin stiffened. Recognition confirmed, it said reluctantly. Air-class authority. Primary claimant. Helios's expression did not change, though something cold settled pleasantly in his chest. I will need a guide, he said, and discretion. The goblin's lips curled in something that might have been a smile, or might have been hunger. Gringotts provides services, it said. Discretion is negotiable. The goblin studied him for a long moment. Then it gave a sharp nod. Follow me, Lord Black. The words echoed softly as the goblin stepped away from the counter, already signaling for a cart. Helios followed, cloak brushing marble, pulse steady. The goblins did not recognize him. They recognized power. The cart screamed as it descended. Steel wheels shrieked against iron rails, sparks flashing as the tunnels twisted and plunged deeper into the earth. Harry stood braced, cloak snapping around him, eyes tracking every curve and junction with a familiarity he hadn't expected to feel this sharply. Gringotts remembered him. Or rather, he remembered Gringotts. The tunnels were intact, uncollapsed and unscarred. In his future, this place had been torn open. Stone ripped apart, tunnels caved in by dragonfire and collapsing wards as he, Ron, and Hermione had fled on the back of a creature that had never deserved its chains. His jaw tightened as they passed one particular cavern. The dragon was still there, chained. Its massive body lay coiled beneath heavy enchantments, wings bound, eyes half-lidded but not dull. They followed the cart as it passed, ancient intelligence burning behind pain and rage. For a moment, just a moment, Harry felt something stir deep in his chest. You're still waiting, he thought grimly, and I'm not your savior this time. Last time, he had freed the dragon. Last time, Gringotts had seized everything he owned in retaliation. Vaults frozen, assets stripped, contracts voided under obscure clauses goblins had been waiting centuries to invoke. He would not make that mistake again. They had arrived at a massive stone wall carved directly into the bedrock of the world. No visible door, no seam, just ancient stone etched with runes so old they no longer translated cleanly into modern magic. The goblin disembarked first and gestured sharply. "Place your palm there," it said, pointing to a shallow indentation in the wall, clearly shaped for a human hand. Harry stepped forward. The moment his skin touched the stone, pain flared. A sharp prickle like needles pressed into bone, racing up his arm and straight into his chest. Instinct screamed at him to pull away. He couldn't. His hand was stuck. Magic surged, invasive and cold, crawling through his veins as if something were tasting him from the inside. Harry clenched his jaw. "What is this?" he demanded, trying and failing to move. The goblin's expression did not soften. If anything, it sharpened. "The House of Black is judging you," it said flatly. "Not Gringotts. Blood judges blood." Harry's eyes narrowed. "And if I were a fake?" The goblin hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, it answered. "You would be cursed," it said quietly. "A bloodline curse. You, your children, your descendants. No one knows the exact nature of it, only that it is absolute." Harry exhaled slowly. "So we Blacks made sure no one ever stole our wealth," he murmured. "Correct," the goblin said. "You do not claim black blood. It claims you." Runes ignited. One by one, symbols flared to life across the stone wall. Ancient sigils of lineage, oaths, and inheritance. They crawled outward like living things, glowing brighter with each heartbeat. Harry felt the ring on his left hand burn. The onyx stone flared, swallowing light instead of reflecting it, the gold band humming with recognition so deep it resonated in his bones. His magic responded instinctively, not fighting, not resisting. Answering. The pain vanished. The pressure lifted. With a sound like grinding mountains, the wall split down the center. Stones slid aside. The vault opened. The goblin bowed, not deeply, but unmistakably. "Welcome," it said, voice edged with something very close to respect. "Lord Helios Alfred Black." Harry stepped forward, heart steady now, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. Whatever waited inside, gold, artifacts, secrets buried deeper than the ministry dared acknowledge. It was his by right. And this time he would be very careful about what he took. By the time Helios Black stepped back into Diagon Alley, Gringotts' cold air finally releasing him, the pouch at his side felt absurdly light for what it represented. 10,000 galleons. 25,000 pounds in neatly stacked Muggle notes, exchanged without comment, without suspicion. And it hadn't even scratched the vault. That realization lingered with him as he walked, slowly now, thoughtfully, through the sunlit bustle of the alley. Children ran past clutching sweets. Witches argued over cauldron thickness. Life went on, unaware that one of Britain's oldest fortunes had just shifted hands again. Filthy rich, Harry thought grimly. He had known the Blacks were wealthy. Everyone did. But this was something else entirely. That vault, it had been cavernous, easily 20 times larger than the Potter vault he remembered. Gold piled not in careless heaps but in deliberate, warded sections. Shelves carved directly into the stone held grimoires bound in dragonhide, tomes sealed with blood-locked clasps, scroll cases marked with sigils that hummed faintly when he passed. Artifacts lay dormant but awake. Rings, blades, mirrors, things wrapped in old magic that predated Hogwarts. Tools. Correspondence, contracts, blood oaths written in ink that pulsed faintly, still alive to the magic that had signed them centuries ago. Secrets that could topple families, destroy reputations, start wars that would never officially exist. All of it had been sitting there, waiting. By the time Harry had come into the Black title in his original timeline, the goblins had already seized everything under damages and liabilities. Dragon escape, structural collapse, breach of contract clauses so old no wizard alive remembered agreeing to them. Now he understood. They hadn't just taken gold. They had taken history. Harry's jaw tightened as he turned down a quieter street and disapparated back to Grimmauld Place. The house greeted him the same way it always did. With hostility. The door slammed shut behind him, dust stirring even though the house elf had been cleaning non-stop since the ritual. The wallpaper still whispered slurs under its breath. The chandelier creaked ominously, as if threatening to fall out of spite. Harry stood in the entrance hall and looked around. Once, this place had been Sirius's prison. Later, it had been his refuge, begrudging, uncomfortable, but safe. Now it was an opportunity. "This won't do," he said calmly. The house groaned. He ignored it and walked forward, boots echoing against stone floors worn down by centuries of resentment. Grimmauld Place was one of the safest structures in Wizarding Britain, layered wards, ancestral protections, blood-locked boundaries that even the Ministry hesitated to challenge. And it was also one of the ugliest, most neglected buildings ever allowed to exist. That would change. Creature. The house elf appeared with a sharp crack, thin body rigid, enormous eyes already burning with resentment. He bowed, but it was stiff, reluctant, the kind of obedience that carried poison in its spine. "Master calls," Creature rasped, voice tight, though Creature does not understand why Master allows this one to remain in the House of Black. Helios didn't react. He had learned long ago that reacting gave creatures like this leverage. Creature's gaze flicked to him anyway, lips curling. "The bastard son," the elf muttered, "spawn of disgrace, son of Sirius Black, who sullied the line and—" "Enough," Helios said calmly. Creature flinched as if struck, spine bending sharply despite himself. Helios turned his head slightly, eyes lifting toward the upper landing. Walburga Black's portrait had been screaming for 2 days straight. It had started the moment Helios had spoken the truth of his birth. A half-blood. A filthy mud. The House of Black will not. The sound had been unbearable, not loud, venomous, a sustained howl of hatred woven so deeply into the canvas that it felt less like noise and more like a curse. Helios had let it scream. For 2 days. That alone had been mercy. He looked back at Creature. "Are there other Black properties?" he asked. Creature's ears twitched. "There are," he admitted reluctantly. "Manors, estates, holdings forgotten and abandoned by traitors and fools." "And their condition?" Helios asked. Creature sneered. "As this one, unkept, forgotten." Helios nodded once. "Good." Creature blinked. "Good, Master." "Take everything," Helios said evenly. "Furniture, artifacts, books, wards, curtains, dust if you must. Everything that belongs to the House of Black." Creature's mouth fell open. "To where?" he croaked. "The Black Manor," Helios replied. "Scotland." Creature froze. The one the Blacks had retreated to when even Grimmauld Place became politically inconvenient. You would abandon the ancestral seat?" Creature whispered, horrified. "No," Helios said. "I'm emptying it." Creature trembled, conflicting compulsions tearing at him. He hated Helios, hated his blood, hated his existence. But the House of Black had spoken. "Yes, Lord Black," Creature whispered. And then he vanished. Creature had already been sent away. Helios had made that decision before he ever stepped into the Muggle world with intent. "Remain at the Black Manor," he had told the house elf, voice level and absolute. "Do not return to Grimmauld Place unless I summon you." Creature had trembled, furious, resentful, obedient. "Yes, Lord Black," he had croaked, vanishing with a sharp crack that left Grimmauld Place empty. Bare stone, hollow rooms, no furniture, no portraits, no house elf muttering curses under his breath. Just an old, angry shell waiting to be reshaped. And reshaping it would not start here. The architect's office was modern, bright, and aggressively sensible. Glass walls, clean lines, white desks, framed blueprints mounted like art. It was the exact opposite of everything Grimmauld Place represented, which made it perfect. Harry sat in a leather chair that was slightly too large for him, feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded neatly in his lap. To anyone looking, he was just what he appeared to be. A 14-year-old boy in a well-tailored coat, far too young to be here alone. The architect smiled politely and indulgently. "So," the man said, leaning back in his chair, "you said on the phone that you wanted to discuss a townhouse renovation." "Yes," Helios replied calmly. The architect glanced toward the door, then back at him. "And your parents?" "I'm the client," Helios said. There it was. The faint tightening around the architect's eyes, the almost invisible shift from professional interest to patient tolerance. "I see," the man said carefully. "Is this a school project? Or perhaps you're gathering ideas for—" Helios reached into his bag. He simply placed the bag on the desk, opened it, and turned it slightly so the contents were visible. The architect's breath caught. Bundles of cash, neatly stacked, orderly, unmistakably real, filled the bag's serious money. The room went very quiet. "Right?" the architect said slowly, posture changing entirely. He straightened, hands bracing on the desk. "All right, let's start over." Helios closed the bag. "I own a townhouse," he said evenly. "It needs to be completely rebuilt on the inside, structurally reinforced, modernized. I plan to live there full-time." The architect studied him now, not dismissively, but intently. "And you have legal authority to commission this work?" "Yes." No hesitation. Another pause. "All right," the architect said. "Tell me what you want." They moved to a large table covered in blank plans. Helios spoke clearly, precisely. "I want white walls," he said. "Wallpaper as well, white, subtle texture. No heavy patterns." The architect nodded, already sketching. "That will help reflect light in a narrow space." "Wood," Helios continued. "A lot of it. Beams where possible. Warm tones. I don't want the house to feel cold." "Hardwood floors?" the engineer asked. "Yes, completely rebuilt. New subflooring." "And the bathrooms?" the architect prompted. "Fully modern," Helios replied. "Plumbing, heating, fixtures. No compromises." They talked for over an hour. Designs took shape, clean lines replacing oppressive ones. Light where there had been shadow, space where there had been suffocation. When the architect finally turned the screen toward Helios, showing him the rendered images of the finished house, the boy studied them carefully. "This works," Helios said. The architect cleared his throat. "The estimate is substantial, given the structural reinforcement, materials, labor." "I'll cover it," Helios said. "How soon would you like us to start?" "Immediately," Helios replied, "and finish as fast as you can without cutting corners." The architect hesitated, One concern: access. Renovation crews will need unrestricted entry. Helios nodded. That won't be a problem. The security system will be adjusted. The architect chose not to ask what that meant. They shook hands. As Helios stood to leave, the architect finally spoke again, unable to keep the curiosity from his voice. "If you don't mind me asking," he said, "how does someone your age come to own a place like that?" Helios paused at the door. "Inheritance," he said simply, and walked out. Harry had not stayed in one place for long. For the past month, he had moving from one black holding to another, guided by the quiet pull of the ring on his left hand. It reacted to land the way a compass reacted to north, warming faintly when he crossed into territory that still remembered the House of Black. On British soil alone, the Blacks held 6 properties, some buried beneath layers of neglect, others preserved by stubborn magic and loyal house elves who had never been told they were allowed to stop caring. One lay in Ireland, its wards ancient and temperamental, responding only after the wards were recharged by offering blood. Everywhere he went, the pattern repeated. Power without oversight. Wealth without stewardship. History allowed to rot. He didn't blame Sirius for not knowing. No one had ever bothered to teach him. Harry walked the grounds of a ruined manor one evening, boots crunching over gravel and broken stone. The house itself leaned inward, ivy choking its walls, windows long shattered. But the land was alive. Wards lay dormant but intact, pressed deep into the soil, layered one atop another in ways magic no longer practiced. This place had been important once. Perhaps the first. There was a broken castle too, nothing more than jagged towers and collapsed halls now, half swallowed by moss and time. Harry stood at its edge and felt something ancient stir beneath his feet. This is where it began, he thought. The original seat of the House of Black, before London, before politics, before everything. If Sirius had known. He exhaled sharply, the thought unfinished. If Sirius had known, he would never have chosen Grimmauld Place as his residence. He would have lived here, or at one of the secluded manors hidden far from prying eyes and ministry. There were 2 more manors, one partially maintained, the other decaying fast. A massive farm lay abandoned, fields overgrown, farmhouse barely standing. No crops, no animals, just land held in quiet defiance of time. And then there were the small houses, unassuming, tucked into Muggle towns and villages, places no one would ever associate with an ancient pureblood family, let alone suspect as magical holdings. Safe houses, he realized, listening posts, escape routes. The Blacks had not just been wealthy, they had been prepared. Harry stood in the doorway of a particularly well-kept manor, noting the careful cleaning spells still humming in the walls. Someone loved this place, he murmured. A house elf appeared nearby, old, bent, eyes bright with wary intelligence. "Lord Black returns," it whispered, voice thick with emotion. Harry inclined his head. "I'm only visiting," he said gently. The elf looked disappointed but nodded. That night, sitting alone by a fire that hadn't been lit in decades, Harry finally allowed himself to plan beyond survival. Grimmauld Place would be rebuilt. It would serve its purpose. But it would not be his home. Not for long. He already knew what would happen there. The Order of the Phoenix would gather. Strategy meetings, arguments, old loyalties and older mistakes repeating themselves with different faces. Grimmauld Place would become a battlefield long before any war was declared. Harry stared into the flames. "When the time comes," he said quietly, "I'll leave it to them." One of the manors, secluded, ward-heavy, far from London, would be restored next. Properly. Not as a symbol, not as a headquarters. As a sanctuary. where Helios Black could exist without the weight of history pressing in from every wall. The House of Black had given him land, power, money. This time he would use them wisely. Number 12 Grimald Place looked the same from the outside. The narrow, soot-darkened facade still sat wedged between its neighbors like an ill-tempered secret. The windows were unchanged. The door still bore the faint scuffs and age-worn marks Harry remembered all too well. To anyone passing by, nothing had shifted. Harry paused for a heartbeat on the doorstep. Then he opened the door. Light greeted him. Not the dim, oppressive gloom that had once pressed down on his shoulders the moment he crossed the threshold, but warm, deliberate light that flowed through the entrance corridor and spilled toward the stairs. The long passage that once felt like a throat closing around its occupants had been transformed. The walls were covered in white patterned wallpaper. Elegant, subtle, designed to reflect rather than swallow light. The carpet beneath his feet was a deep, rich green, soft and newly laid. Overhead, modern fixtures cast a gentle glow, their wiring hidden seamlessly within the walls. Harry stood still, taking it in. All the wiring had been redone. Plumbing too. He could feel it. Magic and mundane systems coexisting without friction. It had cost him a small fortune, but the result was undeniable. He stepped further inside. The old black furniture was there, but changed, restored, polished, reworked by Muggle hands that hadn't been afraid of it. Cabinets gleamed. Tables bore no scorch marks or centuries of neglect. Chairs looked inviting instead of punitive. The walls were adorned not with screaming ancestral portraits, but with Muggle paintings, vast landscapes, abstract pieces, soft modern art that spoke of movement and freedom rather than lineage and judgment. Harry's gaze lifted. A large chandelier hung above the circular staircase, its crystal facets catching the light and scattering it across the walls. Upstairs, every bed, every curtain, every carpet had been removed and replaced. Fresh fabric, clean lines, neutral tones chosen for comfort rather than intimidation. Bathrooms had been entirely rebuilt, spacious, modern, almost luxurious. Glass, steel, and stone combined in ways Wizarding Britain rarely bothered with. Harry let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I can't believe this," he murmured. The only thing untouched was the wall. The black family tree still sprawled across it, etched in old magic, names and branches crawling outward through centuries of pride and cruelty. Harry had been very clear with the architects. Do not touch that wall. Some things were better left intact. The library had been reconstructed too, expanded, brightened, shelves lining the walls in elegant symmetry. But it was empty. Deliberately so. No books yet. Grimald Place would not be safe for anything truly irreplaceable. Too many people will be here in the future. Too many opportunists, too many so-called allies who treated other people's property as communal. Mundungus Fletcher, Harry thought dryly. No. Rare tomes, ritual texts, anything of true value would stay elsewhere. This place would hold references, copies, things meant to be read, not guarded. A soft crack sounded behind him. Master. Harry turned. A small house elf stood near the entrance, hands clasped tightly, eyes wide and shining. She was neat, her clothes clean and carefully mended, posture polite to the point of nervousness. "Mandy," Harry said. "Yes, Master Black," she said quickly, bowing low. Mandy came as soon as Master called. "Mandy is ready to clean, ready to scrub, ready to—" She stopped mid-sentence, looking around. Her ears drooped slightly. "But it is already clean," she said in a small, confused voice. Harry smiled faintly. "I know," he said. "That's why you're here." Mandy looked up at him, startled. "You will take care of this house," Harry continued. "Not just cleaning, maintenance, food. This will be a place people come to live. Her eyes filled instantly. Mandy will do her very best, she whispered fervently. Mandy is very happy. He nodded. Good. Creature remains at the Black Manor. You answer to me directly. Yes, master. As Mandy hurried off, clearly searching for something to do, Harry walked deeper into the house. A television sat in the sitting room, sleek and dark, waiting to be turned on. He paused in front of it, frowning slightly. So strange, he muttered. Magic had always been louder, brighter, but there was something unsettling about how effortlessly Muggle technology filled space. He turned away. There was still work to do. Books to acquire, carefully chosen ones. Builders to contact, magical ones this time. One of the secluded manors would need full restoration, done quietly, far from curious eyes. Grimmauld Place was finished. But it was not his end goal. It was a staging ground. A place that would soon be filled with the Order of the Phoenix, with plans and arguments and old ghosts pretending they knew how to win wars. Harry rested his hand briefly against the newly polished banister. Enjoy it while it lasts, he murmured. Then he turned toward the door, already planning the next reconstruction. This time not for others, but for himself. The House of Black was no longer decaying. For the most part, Harry stayed away from the magical world, simply because he no longer felt tethered to it. When boredom crept in, it was the Muggle world he wandered. Anonymous streets, bookshops that smelled of paper and dust, cafes where no one cared who he was or what he carried in his blood. There were no expectations there, no prophecies, no wars being quietly prepared behind polite smiles. And right now, he had no connections worth maintaining in Wizarding Britain. So what was the point? But today he stood in Diagon Alley once more. The moment he entered, he saw them. Wanted posters. They were plastered along the brick walls and shop windows, layered over one another as if sheer repetition would make the lie feel heavier. Sirius Black. Dangerous. Armed and extremely deranged. Harry stopped only long enough to look. The moving image showed Sirius snarling, hair wild, eyes hollowed by Azkaban's artistry, a caricature of madness, carefully curated. Harry turned away without expression. He was here for two reasons: books and builders. The bookshops came first. Harry moved deliberately, selecting volumes that were useful but replaceable: magical theory, spellcraft references, potions, ward interactions, historical accounts stripped of ministry revision. Nothing that would make Grimmauld Place a target for thieves with flexible morals and wandering hands. Boxes were charmed light and sent ahead to Grimmauld Place, stacking neatly in the empty library. That space would be filled, but cautiously. After that, he headed to the Leaky Cauldron. Tom looked up from polishing a glass and did a double take. "You're young," he said slowly. Harry smiled faintly. "I get that a lot." Tom hesitated, then leaned closer. "What can I do for you?" "I'm looking for some builders," Harry said. "The kind who don't ask too many questions. Engineers." Tom's eyes flicked instinctively toward the wanted posters visible through the doorway. Then back to Harry. "That depends," Tom said carefully, "on how much you're willing to pay." Harry placed a pouch on the bar and loosened the drawstring just enough. Gold glinted. Tom didn't smile, but he nodded. "There's a firm," he said. "Old one. Built half the manors in Wiltshire. You'll find them on Diagon Alley, third door past the apothecary." Harry inclined his head. "Thank you." He met them that same afternoon. He didn't recognize a single face, which suited him just fine. They were wary at first, curious, suspicious of a 14-year-old boy claiming to commission major magical construction. That skepticism lasted until Harry took them to the property. The farm sprawled across rolling land, fields long reclaimed by nature. No crops. Ownership wards flared gently as Harry crossed the boundary, responding to his ring without hesitation. In the distance, the ruined castle loomed. Broken towers, collapsed walls, stone blackened by time and forgotten fires. One of the builders whistled softly. "That's impressive." "That stays," Harry said immediately. They turned to him. "The castle," he continued. "No restoration. Build the manor far enough that it remains visible from the house. That is history. I want it remembered." No one argued. They walked the land together, Harry indicating placement with precise gestures. "Here," he said at last. "The manor goes here." The builders exchanged looks as plans were unrolled. "And the structure?" one asked. Harry didn't hesitate. "2 basements," he said. "The lower one reinforced beyond standard specifications. Ground floor, first floor, second floor." A pause. "That's 5 layers," one of them said carefully. "We've never—" "Money won't be a problem," Harry interrupted calmly. That ended the discussion. They leaned in, interest replacing doubt. "Furnishing?" another asked. "Muggle style," Harry said. "Modern mansion style. No dark wood obsession. No ancestral gloom. I want light, space, function." Several of the builders smiled then. Many of them were Muggle-born. "This," one of them said quietly, "we can do." Plans were drawn, revised, expanded. Harry contributed where necessary: ward integration, structural magic flow, defensive considerations most families never thought to ask about. By the end, they were excited. Construction would begin in secret. Harry hadn't been paying attention. That, more than anything, defined how far removed he'd become from the wizarding world. He no longer followed rumors, no longer listened for the subtle shifts in magical politics or Hogwarts gossip. He had already lived through it once. Painfully thoroughly. There was nothing new waiting for him there. So he stood on black land instead. The air smelled of earth and stone. Workers moved methodically across the property, wands and tools working in tandem as they dug deep into the ground, carving out the beginnings of the first basement. The ditch was enormous, wide, precise, reinforced with temporary runes that glowed faintly as soil was shifted aside. Nearby, placed carefully on a table of conjured stone, sat a miniature model of the future manor. It was beautiful. Scaled towers, wide windows, clean lines. Light and space instead of gloom. The ruined castle loomed in the distance behind it, jagged and ancient, exactly where Harry had ordered it to remain. History watching the future being built. Harry studied the model quietly, hands clasped behind his back. "This is good," he thought. "This is right." "One hell of a place," one of the workers said nearby, wiping sweat from his brow. "Never worked on something like this before." Harry inclined his head slightly but didn't respond. Another worker laughed. "Aye, makes you forget what day it is." "What day is it?" someone else asked. The first worker shrugged. "Final task today. Tri-Wizard Tournament." Harry's attention snapped back sharply. "The tournament?" another added. "Hope Diggory takes it. I've got 10 galleons riding on him at the Leaky Cauldron." A few others chuckled. "He's got the look of a winner," one said. "Fair lad. Works hard." Harry didn't move. Cedric Diggory. The name struck something deep and unwelcome. Images surfaced unbidden. Easy smiles, quiet confidence, an unshakable sense of fairness. A boy who represented everything Hufflepuff stood for without ever needing to announce it. And then, a graveyard. Cold stone. A flash of green light. Kill the spare. Harry closed his eyes briefly. Cedric had died without understanding why. Without knowing what he had walked into. He hadn't been part of some grand destiny or prophecy. He had simply been there. Wrong place, wrong time. He had told himself many times that not everyone could be saved, that some deaths were inevitable, that changing too much would tear the world apart. But that line had blurred long ago. He had already changed the past. So why draw the line here? Harry opened his eyes. The workers were laughing now, discussing odds and bets, unaware of how close one of them was to losing far more than 10 galleons. No, Harry said quietly. They didn't hear him. But he had made the decision. I can't save everyone, he murmured to himself, but I can save him. Cedric Diggory did not deserve to die for a Dark Lord's convenience. Harry turned away from the construction site, cloak shifting with the movement. Keep up the good work, he said aloud, voice carrying just enough authority that the nearest workers straightened instinctively. I'll be back later. Harry disapparated before anyone could ask questions. Harry cursed himself for a fool for the third time in under 5 minutes. He should have come back here. Not years later, not now when every second mattered. He should have come back after the graveyard, after the screams, after the blood, after Cedric Diggory's body had been taken from that cursed place and carried back like a trophy of horror. He had escaped Little Hangleton once, riding the pull of a portkey soaked in death, and he had never looked back. Now the price of that mistake pressed down on him like a tightening noose. The night bus screeched to a halt behind him with a shriek of tortured metal, purple paint gleaming dully under the weak glow of the village lamps. Harry stumbled off, heart pounding, and the bus vanished a second later with a bang that rattled windows and nerves alike. Little Hangleton. The village looked almost peaceful, stone cottages, low fences, hedges trimmed by careful hands. A place where nothing truly terrible should ever happen. And yet Harry knew better. He could still smell it if he closed his eyes. The damp earth, the iron tang of blood, the cold laughter echoing from marble graves. He turned in a slow circle. Nothing. No signposts, no crooked iron gates, no path winding up toward the hill where the Riddle family lay buried. Of course, Harry muttered. Why would it be easy? He grabbed the first passerby he saw, a middle-aged man walking a dog that looked more awake than its owner. Excuse me, Harry said quickly. Cemetery. Where is it? The man frowned, confused. Cemetery? Yes, graveyard, tombstones, dead people. The dog wagged its tail. The man scratched his head. Don't think we've got one kid. Not that I know of. Harry's stomach sank. He tried again. An elderly woman, a pair of teenagers loitering near the pub, a shopkeeper locking up for the night. Every answer was the same. Blank looks, shrugs, mild irritation. No cemetery here. Never heard of it. Must be thinking of somewhere else. Harry stepped away, pulse roaring in his ears. They weren't lying. They genuinely didn't know. Wards, Harry breathed. Not simple concealment charms. Not the sort you brushed aside with a counterspell or clever wandwork. This was deeper. Something designed not just to hide a place, but to erase it from memory entirely. Voldemort. Barty Crouch Jr. Or worse, both. Harry closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. Think. The graveyard had been here. He had stood on its soil. He had watched Cedric die here. Which meant the wards were anchored to the land itself. He turned and walked. Not toward the village, but away from it, trusting instinct over logic. The ground began to slope upward. The air grew heavier, colder, like stepping into deep water. Then he felt it. a pressure sharp and absolute, like walking into an invisible wall. Harry stumbled back with a hiss, wand flying up instinctively. "There you are," he said grimly. Before him the night seemed wrong. The stars dimmed, sound dulled, even the wind avoided the space ahead, as though the world itself refused to acknowledge what lay beyond. A ward field. And a powerful one. Harry swallowed. Breaking wards was not his specialty. In the Phoenix Legion, wardcraft had been an entire division, witches and wizards who lived and breathed layered protections, who dismantled ancient enchantments like surgeons cutting along invisible seams. Harry had learned enough to survive, enough to understand the principles, not enough to be comfortable. He checked his watch. Time was bleeding away. Cedric was out there, alive or not much longer. "All right," Harry muttered, tightening his grip on his wand. "Let's do this the hard way." He pressed forward. Pain exploded behind his eyes. Harry cried out, staggering as the ward lashed back. Not physically, but magically. A brutal backlash that rattled his bones and sent sparks dancing across his vision. His knees nearly buckled. Merlin! This wasn't just a barrier. It was hostile, designed to punish intrusion. Harry wiped blood from his nose and laughed weakly. "Of course it is." He backed away again, forcing himself to think through the pain. Wards like this were layered. Memory suppression, spatial distortion, defensive retaliation. Somewhere, buried beneath it all was a keystone, a logic loop, a condition that held everything together. Find that, and the rest would unravel. Harry knelt and pressed his palm to the cold earth. "Show me," he whispered. Not a spell, not exactly, but a plea to magic itself. He let his awareness sink inward, past the surface sensations, past the familiar hum of spellwork, reaching for the deeper current he had learned to touch only after surviving hell. The ward resisted, snapped at him. He pushed back. Images flickered behind his eyes. Stone angels. Iron gates. A tall marble headstone etched with the name riddle. "There," Harry gasped. The ward wasn't anchored to the whole cemetery. It was anchored to one grave. The centerpiece. Tom Riddle Sr. Harry staggered to his feet, heart hammering. "That's your mistake," he said softly to the empty air. "You tied it to him." He raised his wand and the spell he began was messy. Half-remembered theory, raw intent, and sheer stubborn force braided together into something that would make a proper wardcrafter faint. Runes flared in his mind. He spoke them aloud, voice shaking, sweat pouring down his spine. The ward screamed. Magic tore at him, clawing, punishing, trying to drive him away. Harry screamed back and pushed. With a sound like glass shattering underwater, the field collapsed. Harry stumbled forward and suddenly the world snapped into place. The hill rose before him. The iron gates stood open, rusted and waiting. And beyond them, the cemetery of Little Hangleton lay revealed. Harry stopped at the edge of the cemetery and every instinct he possessed screamed at him to drop flat and disappear. The graveyard was not empty. It was crowded. Dozens of figures stood among the crooked headstones, their dark cloaks fluttering faintly in the unnatural chill. Silver masks caught the moonlight, blank, emotionless, identical. Wands glimmered in gloved hands. Some Death Eaters stood in clusters, murmuring to one another. Others patrolled the perimeter with disciplined precision. This was wrong. Very wrong. The last time Harry had stood in this cursed place, it had been empty when he arrived, silent except for the wind whispering through dead grass. The Death Eaters had come later, summoned after Voldemort's rebirth like carrion birds drawn to blood. Now they were already here. Harry slowly lowered himself behind a tall, leaning angel statue, heart hammering so hard he feared it might give him away. He forced his breathing to slow, to steady, and let his eyes move, not his body. There were too many of them. He counted quickly. 15. More than that, possibly 20. And they were not standing around aimlessly. There was structure here, purpose. At the center of the graveyard, where Tom Riddle Sr.'s grave lay, a wide circle had been cleared. Ancient runes glowed faintly in the soil, etched deep and precise. A cauldron stood there, larger than the one Harry remembered, its metal blackened and inscribed with symbols he didn't recognize. Relief and horror crashed into Harry at the same time. I'm not too late. But I might be too early. Harry clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms as Hermione's voice echoed in his mind, calm and relentless, just as it had been during their long, late-night arguments about magic that should never be touched. Time isn't a straight line, Harry. It's a web. You tug one thread, and you don't just move one thing, you shift everything connected to it. Ripples. Hermione had called them ripples. Harry finally understood. He had changed things, so many things. Power gained too early. Knowledge taken out of sequence. People saved who should have died. Resources moved, plans altered, choices made before their time. Of course the timeline fought back. Of course it adapted. Damn it, Harry whispered. The Death Eaters were here early because something had warned them, or accelerated their plans, or removed an obstacle that had delayed them before. Me. Harry exhaled slowly and forced himself to think. Charging in now would be suicide. Even at his strongest, before the ritual backlash, before the strain on his magic, he wouldn't have taken on 20 masked Death Eaters alone. He wasn't Merlin. He wasn't some mythical god who could snap his fingers and rewrite reality. He was powerful, but not stupid. He studied the scene carefully, cataloging details like a general surveying a battlefield. The Death Eaters were alert, but not frantic. This wasn't the climax yet. It was preparation. They were waiting for someone. Voldemort. Harry's gaze snapped to the edge of the graveyard, where a tall, hooded figure stood apart from the others, leaning slightly on a carved staff. His mask was different, older, more ornate. Gold traced the edges of the silver. Lucius Malfoy. Harry's jaw tightened. If Voldemort wasn't here, then this ritual hadn't started yet. Which meant Cedric could still be saved. Harry shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the loose gravel beneath his boots, and pressed his back against the cold stone of the angel statue. He drew his cloak tighter around himself and whispered a silent charm, dulling his magical signature until it faded into the background noise of the place. The Death Eaters would be watching for enemies. Harry watched as one of the masked figures approached the cauldron and spoke in a low voice. "Everything is ready," the man said. "The land is secured. The wards are stable." Another Death Eater replied, his voice sharp with impatience. "The Dark Lord will not tolerate any failure." Lucius lifted a hand, silencing them both. "He will arrive when he is ready," Lucius said coolly. "Our task is to ensure that when he does, nothing interferes." From the shadows, Harry watched as the Death Eaters moved. One by one, 20 in all, they dropped to their knees in perfect unison, heads bowed, wands lowered. The motion rippled through the graveyard like a dark tide, silent and rehearsed. At their center stood Peter Pettigrew. He was thinner than Harry remembered, more hunched, clutching something wrapped in filthy, blood-stained rags. His hands trembled violently, yet his face shone with a devotion that made Harry's skin crawl. Harry didn't need to see beneath the cloth. Voldemort. Cold dread settled deep in his chest. This was happening too early, too cleanly, too correctly. His thoughts spiraled, grasping for logic. I changed something, he thought wildly. I shouldn't be here. This isn't supposed to happen like this. If he had fractured the past, then everything depended on what happened next. Not glory, not victory. Survival. Because if the boy he once was walked into this graveyard unprepared, into 20 armed Death Eaters kneeling before a reborn Dark Lord, then there would be no escape. And neither of them would survive. Magic surged. A blinding flash of golden light erupted near the headstones, forcing Harry to shield his eyes. When the light faded, the Triwizard Cup lay abandoned on the frozen ground, rolling once before striking a gravestone and falling still. No scream followed. No curse. Harry's breath caught. Slowly, a figure took shape where the light had been. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, palms pressed into the frost-covered earth. Long red hair spilled over her shoulders, tangled and wild, catching the moonlight like fire. Harry stared. No. She lifted her head. For a single, terrible moment, Harry thought he was looking at a ghost. She had his mother's coloring. Not exact, but close enough to hurt. The same defiant set of the jaw. The hazel eyes that looked up at the ring of masked figures with confusion and fury rather than fear. A girl. Roughly his age. The Death Eaters did not move in shock. They did not hesitate. They closed in. Lucius Malfoy stepped forward, voice smooth, certain. She has arrived, my lord. From within the rags, something shifted. A thin, satisfied voice slid across the graveyard like ice. The girl who lived, come to die, Voldemort said softly. This wasn't a ripple he created. This was something else. Harry's brain is not braining. He remained crouched behind the angel statue, fingers locked so tightly around his wand that his knuckles ached, staring at the red-haired girl kneeling in the graveyard mud as if the world had decided to mock him personally. A girl. Potter. The girl who lived. For one sickening heartbeat, his brain tried to force the image into something it understood: Cedric's broad shoulders, his own panicked breathing, the cup jerking them into darkness. But no matter how hard he stared, the truth didn't change. The girl lifted her head, eyes wide, chest heaving. The fog clung to her hair and lashes. Her face was spattered with dirt from the Portkey landing, and yet there was something stubborn and bright in her expression that made Harry's throat close. His mother's cheekbones. And his father's reckless defiance sitting in her spine like it belonged there. Harry swallowed hard. What does that make me? He whispered, voice barely audible even to himself. If she was the girl who lived, then in this world Harry Potter wasn't. The implications hit him in waves. I didn't just go back in time. I went sideways. A different world threaded into the same year like someone had stitched the universe wrong. Harry's gaze flicked to the Death Eaters. Masked, waiting. This alone proved he wasn't in his own timeline. In his history, the graveyard had been empty until the ritual finished. The Death Eaters had arrived in confusion, some crying, some laughing, some begging. Here, they were already assembled, bowed in a ring as Pettigrew stepped forward, cradling the rag-wrapped bundle like a sacred relic. Harry's stomach twisted. Time travel ripples, Hermione had tried to drill it into him. You change one thing, she'd said once, pressing her fingers hard into his wrist as if she could anchor his attention there. And it doesn't just change that thing, it changes what touches it. And what touches that. And what touches that. Your future won't break. Harry, it will reshape around your choices. He'd listened. He'd nodded. He'd forgotten. because he'd never believed the universe could be this cruelly inventive. And now he was looking at a nightmare his own logic hadn't even considered. If the girl who lived was the one dragged here, then the plan had already been rewritten. If Voldemort was preparing this ritual for a girl, then who else was different? The thought struck him so hard he nearly gagged. What if Hermione is a man in this world? The image was so wrong, so absurdly wrong, that bile rose in his throat. Harry clamped his mouth shut and breathed through his nose, forcing the nausea down. Focus. Rose, the girl who lived, staggered to her feet. Her wand was already in her hand, held in a tight grip. Her eyes darted over the masked circle, over Pettigrew, over the bundle in his arms. "What is this?" she demanded, voice shaking but loud. "Where am I?" So Cedric maybe existed in this world. But he just hadn't come with her. Rose's wand flicked toward Pettigrew. "You!" she snapped. "What do you want, traitor?" Pettigrew flinched as if her voice had struck him. His watery eyes darted over her face, and Harry saw it, recognition. He licked his lips, trying to steady himself. "Rosie," Pettigrew stammered. "It's been a while." Rose's expression tightened with disgust. "Don't call me that." A few Death Eaters shifted. One let out a low, amused chuckle behind his mask. Pettigrew swallowed, clutching the rag bundle closer. You don't understand. You were chosen the Dark Lord he needs." Rose's eyes flicked to the bundle. Twitched. A faint, wet sound came from within the rags, like something trying to breathe through wrong lungs. Rose took an involuntary step back. "What is that?" she whispered. Harry's chest tightened. She didn't know. She had never seen Voldemort reduced to a thing in cloth. That meant she still had innocence left. And that meant he couldn't let it be destroyed here. Pettigrew's voice grew more confident, as if her ignorance fed him. "It is our Lord," he said, reverent now. "He has waited so long for this moment. You, your blood, your victory, your magic." Rose lifted her wand again, anger flaring. "My blood? Are you insane?" Pettigrew laughed nervously. No, not insane. Not anymore. Not now that we will have him back." A Death Eater stepped forward, tall and composed. "Enough," the masked man said, voice smooth as poisoned wine. Pettigrew shrank instantly. "Why, yes, my lord, sir." The Death Eater looked down at Rose like she was a specimen. "The ritual must proceed," he said calmly. "We have no time for your questions, Potter." Harry felt a sharp, bitter twist inside him. So she carries the weight I carried. And maybe she never asked for it either. Rose's voice hardened. "Let me go." The circle of masked figures did not move, but the air tightened, the silent readiness of 20 wands. The ritual continued. No matter how much Harry wished, no matter how tightly his fingers dug into stone, no matter how violently his magic recoiled in protest, the ritual continued exactly as it had the first time. Rose Potter was dragged forward. She fought. Kicked. One Death Eater took a hex to the knee for his trouble and went down with a scream, but there were too many of them. Rough hands seized her arms, her hair, her shoulders, forcing her against an old marble tombstone carved with a half-erased angel. "No! Get away from me!" Rose shouted, thrashing wildly. Ropes snapped around her wrists and chest, magic tight and unforgiving, pinning her to the stone. Her wand was torn from her grasp and tossed aside. Harry's nails bit into his palm hard enough to draw blood. Just like last time. Peter Pettigrew limped forward, pale and sweating, clutching a dagger that gleamed dully in the moonlight. His breath came in ragged gasps, but his eyes shone with manic devotion. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. Pettigrew croaked. The ground trembled. A fragment of bone tore itself from beneath a nearby grave, ripping free with a wet, grinding sound that made Rose gag and turn her head away, eyes squeezed shut. Harry swallowed bile. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed. Pettigrew did not hesitate. He raised the dagger and brought it down. His scream ripped through the graveyard, raw and animal, as blood sprayed across the ritual circle. The Death Eaters watched in rapt silence as Pettigrew collapsed, clutching the ruined stump of his arm. Rose screamed. "No, no, stop, please." Harry's heart hammered violently. And blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. The ritual knife turned toward her. Rose shook her head violently, tears streaking down her dirt-smeared face. "I didn't do anything to you. I didn't." The blade bit into her arm. Her scream cut off abruptly, turning into a choked sob as blood spilled into the cauldron. Harry almost moved then. Almost. But he forced himself to stay, because he knew what came next. The cauldron began to boil. The contents inside writhed, twisted, thickened, forming something grotesque and humanoid. The air grew heavy, pressing against Harry's lungs as dark magic surged outward in violent waves. And then, the thing rose. Bone knit to flesh. Flesh sealed over sinew. Skin stretched, pale and unnatural. Lord Voldemort stepped out of the cauldron hole. Naked, pale, snake-like, alive. Harry felt it like a knife driven between his ribs. Even knowing it would happen did nothing to dull the horror of seeing him reborn. The Death Eaters dropped to their knees in unison. "My lord," they whispered. Voldemort drew a shuddering breath, red eyes burning as he flexed his fingers, testing his body like a man trying on a new suit. "It is good to be whole again," he said softly. Rose stared at him in pure terror. Her entire body was trembling now, shoulders shaking as she fought not to break. Harry's jaw tightened. "She's a child. Chosen or not, prophesied or not. She was a child." And something inside Harry snapped. "She's my sister." The thought came unbidden, fierce and absolute. "I don't care what this world says. She is." Voldemort turned his gaze to her slowly. "The girl who lived," he said, tasting the words. How ironic. How fitting. Rose swallowed hard. "You're wrong. I am the girl who lived while you died," she said hoarsely. The Death Eaters hissed. Voldemort smiled. "Bold," he said softly. "Just like your mother." Harry flinched. Voldemort raised a hand. "Release her." The ropes vanished. Rose collapsed forward, barely catching herself before she hit the ground. She scrambled for her wand instinctively, and Voldemort flicked his fingers. Her wand flew across the dirt and landed neatly at her feet. Harry's eyes narrowed. "I will not have it said," Voldemort announced, turning slowly so his followers could see, "that I hide behind numbers or tricks. I will show you that my defeat was a fluke." His red eyes locked onto Rose. "You will duel me." Rose's breath hitched. "You what?" "Pick up your wand." She hesitated. Voldemort's smile widened. "Do it." Slowly, so slowly, Rose reached down and picked up her wand. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to straighten, lifting her chin. She stood the way Harry once had. Opposite him. Alone. Voldemort raised his wand lazily. "Begin." Rose didn't hesitate. "Stupefy." Red light shot from her wand. Voldemort waved it aside without even looking. Expelliarmus. Again, deflected effortlessly. She tried again and again. Textbook spells, clean pronunciation, perfect form. Harry watched with mounting dread. This is how I fought. This is how I almost died. Voldemort laughed softly, circling her. Is that all they taught you? He mocked. Defense. A curse slammed into Rose's shoulder, hurling her backward into a gravestone. She cried out, gasping in pain, but she rolled, pushed herself up, wand still clenched tight. Harry's grip on his wand trembled. Again, Voldemort said lightly. She attacked. She fell. She stood. Again. 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 Blood ran from her lip. Her breathing turned ragged. Her legs shook, but every time she hit the ground, she forced herself back up, eyes blazing with defiance. The Death Eaters murmured. Voldemort grew bored. Harry could see it, the shift, the moment play turned into intent. Now Harry thought grimly, if I don't act now, she dies. He stepped out of the shadows. Magic coiled around him, dark and controlled, his wand lifting as his eyes locked onto Voldemort's exposed flank. Enough, Harry said clearly. The word cut through the graveyard like a blade. Every head snapped toward him. Then the Death Eaters laughed. Not all of them, just enough. A ripple of amusement passed through the circle as they finally took him in properly. The height, the slight frame, the fact that he was barely older than the girl trembling in front of the tombstone. Wands lowered an inch, shoulders relaxed. One of them muttered, "Is this a joke?" Voldemort did not laugh. His red eyes narrowed, pupils contracting as they fixed on Harry with sharp, predatory focus. He tilted his head, studying him the way a snake studies something it does not immediately recognize as prey. Harry ignored the circle entirely. He looked only at Voldemort. "So you're Voldemort?" Harry said casually, as if confirming a rumor in a pub. His voice carried, steady, clear, untouched by fear. "I've heard quite a lot about you." The Death Eaters stiffened. Voldemort's lip curled faintly. "You know about me?" he said softly. Harry shrugged. "Hard not to. You're famous for all the wrong reasons." Rose stared at him. She hadn't even noticed she'd stopped shaking until that moment. Harry took a slow step forward, boots crunching softly against gravel and bone fragments. He didn't raise his wand yet. He let the silence stretch, let curiosity bloom. "I thought," Harry continued mildly, "that you were supposed to be some great dark lord, a terror of the age, a master of magic so powerful that grown wizards tremble when they hear your name." He tilted his head, eyes flicking briefly to Rose, bloodied, exhausted, still standing. "But here you are," he said, returning his gaze to Voldemort, "hurting a little girl." A murmur rippled through the Death Eaters, uneasy this time. Harry's voice sharpened, not louder, just colder. "Is that it?" he asked. "Is this all you could do? To prove to your followers that you can bully children?" Voldemort's fingers twitched. Rose could feel it, the shift in the air, the way the magic around him tightened like a noose being pulled. "You dare," Voldemort said quietly, "to speak to me like that?" Harry smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already seen worse. "I dare," Harry replied, "because I don't see a Dark Lord. I see a coward fresh out of a cauldron, picking the weakest target in here so you can feel big. That did it." The ground cracked beneath Voldemort's feet as his magic flared, raw and violent. Several Death Eaters recoiled instinctively, cloaks snapping in the surge of power. Who are you? Voldemort snarled, voice echoing unnaturally across the cemetery. And what do you want? Harry finally raised his wand. He didn't point it at Voldemort yet. He stepped sideways instead, deliberately placing himself between Voldemort and Rose. A shield without casting a spell. Who I am, Harry said calmly, is none of your concern. Rose's breath caught. Harry didn't look back at her, but she felt it anyway, the deliberate positioning, the certainty in his stance. He wasn't posturing. He was protecting. And what I want, Harry continued, is something you can't give me, so let's not waste time pretending we're here to negotiate. Voldemort laughed then, but there was no humor in it. A child challenging me, he said softly. How quaint, how familiar. Harry's eyes hardened. Wrong, he said. A child is what you were just fighting. He lifted his wand fully now, arm steady, magic coiling tight and dangerous beneath his skin. If you want to fight, Harry said, voice dropping into something sharp and final, fight me. The Death Eaters erupted in protest. My lord. He's nothing. Allow us. Voldemort raised a hand. Silence snapped into place. His gaze never left Harry. You place yourself before her, Voldemort observed slowly. Why? Harry didn't answer immediately. Because the truth, that Rose felt like family, that she wore his mother's face, that he had already watched one innocent die here once, was not something Voldemort deserved to hear. Instead, Harry said simply, because I don't like bullies. The first curse came like a hammer. Harry barely had time to register the motion of Voldemort's wand before instinct took over. He raised his own wand and twisted his wrist sharply. The air cracked. The bone-breaking curse slammed into the hastily formed shield and shattered, dispersing into a spray of pale sparks that bit into the surrounding gravestones. Stone groaned. Marble split. Harry slid back half a step, boots grinding against gravel. Pain flared up his arm, but it was dull. Weak, he realized instantly. Not harmless, but weak. Harry's eyes narrowed. Voldemort had his body back, but his magic had not fully followed him through the ritual yet. The power was there, coiled and hungry, but sluggish, like a predator waking from hibernation. Good, Harry thought grimly, because Harry himself was weakened too. His magic surged hot and fast, but it crashed against the limits of his 14-year-old body, constrained by smaller channels and immature reserves. In his prime, this duel would already be over. Now it was a race of precision. Harry snapped his wand forward. The air around Voldemort boiled. A blood-boiling curse, dark, vicious, designed to rupture vessels from the inside out, ripped toward him. Voldemort's red eyes flashed. He swatted it aside with contemptuous ease. A second spell followed immediately, sharper, crueler. A cutting curse that hummed with dark intent, designed not to slice flesh but to unmake it. Voldemort spun away from it with serpentine grace, robes snapping. He laughed. Appreciatively. So, Voldemort breathed, circling Harry slowly, wand loose and relaxed in his long fingers. You know dark magic. Harry didn't answer. He sent another curse, this one eating, corrosive, meant to rot flesh on contact. Voldemort vanished in a blur and reappeared 3 steps to the left. Powerful, Voldemort continued softly, his voice sliding into the sibilant cadence of serpent speech without effort. Advanced spellwork, control beyond your years. Harry felt it then, the subtle pull. Recognition. Voldemort's magic brushed against his own like a probing finger. Then why? Voldemort asked, now fully speaking in the language of snakes. Do you stand against me? Harry answered in kind, his reply slipping into Parseltongue without conscious thought. Because you mistake cruelty for strength, Harry hissed back. Voldemort's smile widened. You are no light wizard, Voldemort said. Not like those fools who hide behind rules and mercy. You are one of us. The Death Eaters leaned forward slightly. Harry felt Rose behind him, felt her fear, her confusion, her fragile hope. And you should be with me, Voldemort finished. Harry's response was a curse. A bone-eating spell, raw and hungry, ripping through the air like a living thing. Voldemort laughed outright this time as he twisted away, robes fluttering. 2 green flashes erupted in response. Harry felt them before he saw them. Killing curse, he thought coldly. He dove to the side, rolling across the dirt as the first Avada Kedavra passed where his head had been a heartbeat before, obliterating a tombstone behind him. The second was aimed past him. At Rose. Harry didn't think. He flicked his wand backhanded and whispered, Depello! The banishing charm struck Rose squarely in the chest. She cried out as she was flung backward, skidding across the grass and crashing behind a stone angel, just as the killing curse tore through the space she had occupied. Green light scorched the night air. Rose lay gasping, alive. Harry was already back on his feet. Rage burned bright and focused in his chest. You miss, Harry said calmly. Voldemort's eyes gleamed. The duel exploded. Spells collided midair, detonating in showers of sparks and shockwaves that rattled the graveyard. Dark curses, defensive wards, cutting hexes, transfigurations half-formed and redirected. Neither of them shouted the spells. This was not a duel of beginners. Harry recognized every spell Voldemort cast, not from books, but from experience. These were the same spells he had seen pureblood elites use during the war with the Phoenix Legion. Old magic, efficient magic. Magic meant to kill and destroy. Harry redirected a curse with a sharp flick of his wrist. It slammed into a Death Eater standing too close to the circle. The man screamed as his arm crystallized and shattered. Another redirected curse caught a second Death Eater across the chest, throwing him backward into a grave. They fell. But none of the others intervened. Harry noticed. Of course they didn't. Pure blood custom. A duel was sacred. And more than that, they were afraid. Voldemort was smiling now, genuinely enjoying himself. He moved like a dancer, spells flowing from his wand in seamless arcs, his laughter cutting through the clash of magic. Who are you? Voldemort asked between spells. You fight like a veteran, but you are a child. Harry blocked a curse that would have caved in his ribcage. Curious, Harry replied coolly, sending a slicing hex that grazed Voldemort's shoulder and drew first blood. You've returned from death, and you still ask pointless questions. Voldemort hissed, eyes flashing with delight rather than anger. Ah, he said, you wound me. That takes skill. Harry's breath came faster now. His body was starting to feel it. The drain. The limits. Voldemort noticed. He pressed harder. A crucio tore through the air. Harry twisted, letting it graze him instead of striking fully. Pain exploded down his spine, white-hot and vicious. Harry bit down on a scream and used the momentum to roll, sending a shockwave back at Voldemort that shattered 3 headstones. Rose watched from behind her cover, horror and all warring on her face. He's fighting Voldemort, her mind screamed. He's actually fighting him. Harry staggered but stayed upright. You enjoy this, Harry said, voice tight, magic crackling around him. Hurting people weaker than you. Voldemort's eyes narrowed slightly. And you, he said, voice silky, enjoy standing between predator and prey. Harry smiled. Someone has to. Voldemort raised his wand again. The air thickened. Harry felt it. Voldemort was about to escalate. Now Harry thought, before my body gives out. He shifted his stance subtly, edging backward, herding the duel closer to the gravestone where the Triwizard Cup lay hidden. Voldemort followed, intrigued, predatory. Still running, Voldemort taunted. Even now. Harry didn't answer. He cast 3 spells in rapid succession: feints, distractions, pressure. Voldemort countered all of them effortlessly. But it bought Harry seconds. Seconds were enough. Harry risked a glance back. Rose met his eyes. Run when I say, Harry said quietly. She shook her head fiercely. I'm not leaving you. Harry's gaze hardened. That wasn't a request. Voldemort's laugh echoed. How touching, he mocked. Very well, let us end this. He raised his wand high. Now, Harry shouted. Harry had expected to fall alone. That had been the plan, if it could be called one. He had calculated the angle, the distance, the timing. He would block long enough, distract long enough, bleed long enough. Rose would run, grab the cup, vanish. And Harry, Helios Black, Harry Potter, whatever the world wanted to call him, would buy those seconds with his body. The curse hit him like a mountain. Raw force. His shield caught it, but only barely. The impact detonated against his hastily raised barrier, and Harry was flung backward as if swatted aside by a giant's hand. He felt ribs crack midair, felt breath tear from his lungs, felt the night spin violently as he flew. He slammed into a gravestone back first. Stone shattered. Pain exploded white-hot across his spine and shoulders, and for a moment the world reduced itself to nothing but fire and ringing silence. His wand nearly slipped from his fingers, but instinct, trained by years of war, kept it locked in his grip. Harry dragged in a ragged breath. Stay up. His vision swam, but he forced his eyes to focus. Voldemort stood across the clearing, wand already rising again. No hesitation. No speech. No theatrics this time. Just murder. Green light bloomed at the tip of Voldemort's wand. Harry's mind snapped into brutal clarity. Killing curse. He had seen this before. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. He had watched it shatter shields, tear through enchantments, erase people from existence. But he had also seen it stopped. Dumbledore, standing in the atrium, had shown the world a truth few acknowledged. The killing curse could not be blocked by magic alone. But it could be blocked by matter. Solid, dense, real. Harry's wand moved even as his body screamed in protest. Stone. Marble. He reached for it instinctively, shaping the spell in his mind. Massachusetts density, angle, intercept. The ground beneath him trembled as the beginnings of a marble barrier surged upward. And then, someone stepped in front of him. No! Harry croaked. Too slow. Rose Potter moved without thinking. She stepped directly into the path of death. Harry saw her back first, slender, shaking, shoulders squared in absolute defiance. She threw both arms out as if she could physically shield him, as if her body alone could stop what magic could not. No! Harry shouted, reaching for her, his wand jerking wildly. The killing curse struck her square in the chest. Green light swallowed her. For a single, horrifying second, Rose Potter glowed like a dying star. Then she collapsed backward, into Harry's arms. The world stopped. Harry caught her automatically, arms locking around her weight as she hit the ground. Her wand slipped from her fingers, clattering uselessly against stone. "No," Harry whispered. His voice didn't sound like his own. "No, no, no, no." Around them, silence reigned. Absolute. The Death Eaters had frozen. Some stood half-raised, wands still lifted, eyes wide behind their masks. Others had taken a step forward and stopped mid-motion, as if the scene before them had short-circuited their understanding of reality. Across the clearing, Voldemort staggered. The killing curse backlash rippled through him, subtle but visible. He dropped to one knee, one hand braced against the earth, breath coming shallow. His red eyes burned brighter for a moment, then dulled slightly, confusion flickering beneath the surface. The Death Eaters murmured, "My lord." Voldemort raised a hand sharply, silencing them. His wand remained raised, green light fading slowly from its tip. Harry stared down at Rose's face. She looked peaceful. Her freckles stood out sharply against her pale skin. Her red hair spilled across his arm, catching on the jagged edge of the shattered gravestone. "No," he said again, louder now, panic clawing into his throat. "Rose, stay with me. Stay." Harry's hands began to shake. Memories crashed into him with brutal force. Cedric's body hitting the ground. His own scream tearing his throat raw. The world spinning, uncaring. Not again. "I won't." "She didn't know," Harry said hoarsely, lifting his head to glare at Voldemort. His eyes burned, not with tears, but something far darker. "She didn't even understand what you were." Voldemort tilted his head slowly, studying the scene with naked curiosity. "How familiar," Voldemort said softly. "She died protecting someone else. How very Potter." Harry clutched her to his chest. Tightly. Harry squeezed his eyes shut. "No, not again." And then he felt it. A pulse. Faint, fragile, but unmistakable. Harry's breath caught sharply in his throat. His hand, pressed flat against her chest, felt it again, an uneven flutter, like a heart remembering how to beat. His eyes snapped open. At the same moment, something moved. A thin, oily black wisp seeped out from Rose's forehead scar, writhing like smoke trapped in liquid. It made a faint, terrible sound, half scream, half hiss, as it tore free of her skin and evaporated into nothingness. Harry stared. Then understanding crashed into him with dizzying force. The Horcrux. Just like him. Just like that night in the forest. Harry let out a long, shaking breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She's alive," his mind whispered. Relief hit him so hard his knees nearly buckled. But he didn't smile. Didn't react. Because Voldemort was watching. Harry forced his body to remain rigid, grief-stricken, broken. He bowed his head over Rose's body as if in mourning, shoulders tense, face shadowed. Harry rose slowly. Rose's body slid gently to the ground as he rose. Every movement was measured, deliberate. His magic churned beneath his skin, tightly leashed. "This," Harry said quietly, voice carrying across the graveyard, "was unnecessary." Voldemort looked up at him, eyes sharp despite his weakened state. She was an enemy, Voldemort said coldly. She served her purpose. Harry's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. Even enemies, Harry replied, deserve to be returned to their loved ones. He lifted his wand. The Triwizard Cup, still lying near the shattered gravestone, shuddered, scraped across the dirt, and flew toward him. At the last moment, Harry redirected it. The cup veered sharply and slammed into Rose's still form. Golden light flared. And then nothing. The cup vanished. So did Rose's body. The Death Eaters froze. For a heartbeat, the graveyard was silent. Harry lowered his wand slowly. She will be buried, Harry said evenly, meeting Voldemort's gaze, by those who loved her. Voldemort studied him for a long moment, red eyes calculating, unreadable. Around them, Death Eaters raised their wands instinctively, all pointing at Harry now. 20 magical signatures locked onto him, lethal and ready. Who are you? Voldemort asked again, voice soft but dangerous. And how did you find us? Harry exhaled once. Now, I am Helios Black, Harry said calmly. The name rippled through the circle. A few Death Eaters stirred, exchanging glances. I came looking for my father, Harry continued. Sirius Black. That got a reaction. A sharp intake of breath from one masked figure. Sirius Black? Another murmured. The blood traitor? Harry's eyes flicked briefly toward Voldemort. Everyone says he was your right-hand man. Voldemort's interest sharpened visibly. Sirius Black, Voldemort said thoughtfully. Yes, he was one of mine. Several Death Eaters leaned closer now, scrutinizing him. One spoke, voice slow with realization. He looks like one, the man said. The face, the eyes. A black, another agreed. No doubt about it. Harry said nothing. Voldemort rose slowly to his feet, weakness fading beneath renewed purpose. He circled Harry once, studying him openly now, predator evaluating potential. You followed my followers, Voldemort said. Tracked them here. Yes, Harry replied simply. And interfered in my business that alone should have killed you, Voldemort added. And yet you stand. Harry met his gaze without flinching. I'm difficult to kill. Voldemort smiled. It was a thin, pleased thing. I see a great deal of myself in you, Voldemort said softly. Power, will, ambition. Harry said nothing. You are not aligned with the light, Voldemort continued. And you are not ignorant. You are powerful. He stopped directly in front of Harry. I would have you with me, Voldemort said. Will you join me? The Death Eaters held their breath. Harry paused, as if considering it seriously. I need time to think, he said at last. Voldemort studied his face for signs of deception. Found none he cared to acknowledge. Very well, Voldemort said. Then go. The Death Eaters stiffened. My lord. Voldemort raised a hand. He leaves. Slowly, reluctantly, the circle parted. Harry turned to go, but one Death Eater called out, suspicion sharp in his tone. And how will we find you, Helios Black? Harry stopped. Did not turn around. You don't, Harry said quietly. A pause. Then he added, I find you, like I did today. The words settled over them like a curse. Harry stepped beyond the ward stone. The air shifted, and he was gone. Behind him, Voldemort watched the empty space with keen interest, lips curling slightly upward. The day had been a success. He had his body back. The girl who lived was dead, sent back to Hogwarts for all to see. and perhaps most intriguingly of all, a new weapon had revealed itself. A black prodigy. A boy who fought like a veteran. Voldemort's red eyes gleamed. "Yes," he murmured to the night. "Today was a very good day indeed." Far away, in a different place, Rose Potter drew a sudden, gasping breath. "Alive. Rose." The voice was soft, familiar, warm in a way nothing in the graveyard had been. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered weakly. I'm dead." The voice chuckled gently, the sound full of affection and sadness all at once. "You always were dramatic," the woman said. Rose's eyes flew open. For one impossible, breathtaking moment, she saw her. Lily Potter stood beside her, red hair glowing softly in the pale light, green eyes full of love. She looked exactly like the photographs, exactly like the woman Rose had seen smiling from moving frames her entire life. "Mom," Rose breathed. Tears welled instantly, blurring her vision. Her chest ached with it, with longing so deep it felt physical. Lily reached out and brushed Rose's hair back from her forehead, fingers warm, real. "You did so well," Lily murmured. "So brave, just like your father." Rose sobbed then, a broken, desperate sound. "I was going to die," she said shakily. "I knew it. I ran in front of it. I didn't even think." "I know," Lily said gently. "I know." Rose squeezed her eyes shut, clutching at the blankets. I thought I was coming to you, to Dad." Lily's smile softened, tinged with something unreadable. "Not yet." The memory crashed back into Rose like a wave. The graveyard. The masked figures. The thing in rags. And then him. The boy who had stepped out of the shadows. The way he spoke. Fearless, sharp, utterly unafraid of Voldemort. The way he stood in front of her. Protected her. Her throat tightened. "The boy," Rose whispered. He fought him. He told me to run." Lily's hand paused. "There are many things you don't understand yet," Lily said quietly. "But you will." Rose tried to sit up, panic flooding her. "Did he live? Mom, did he?" The world shifted. The warmth faded. The smell of potions sharpened. Lily's hand vanished from her hair. Rose woke to the smell of potions and clean linen. For a few long seconds, she didn't move, didn't breathe properly. She lay still beneath the covers, afraid that if she opened her eyes too quickly the fragile illusion would shatter and she would be dragged back into darkness, into green light, into the cold certainty of death. Her chest felt tight. Her heart was racing. Pain flared across her body, sharp and immediate. "Oof, don't do that," a familiar brisk voice snapped. Madame Pomfrey appeared at her bedside in a flurry of starched white and disapproval. "Miss Potter, you have been unconscious for hours. Hours. You were exposed to extraordinarily dark magic, not to mention shock, exhaustion, and—" Rose stared at her, heart pounding. Hospital wing. White curtains. Sunlight filtering through tall windows. She was alive. "Madame Pomfrey?" Rose croaked. Yes, it's me," the matron said, pressing her gently back down with surprising strength. "Lie still. You are not going anywhere." Rose swallowed hard. I'm not dead." Pomfrey paused, studying her face carefully. "No," she said finally. "You are very much alive." Relief hit Rose so hard she started shaking. "I survived," she whispered. "I survived again." Pomfrey's expression tightened. Yes, and the entire wizarding world is going to want to know what happened. Rose's breath hitched. Memories returned in fragments. Being dragged from the maze, the cup glowing, the graveyard appearing out of nowhere. She remembered screaming, remembered pain, remembered dying. What happened? Rose asked softly. How did I get back? Pomfrey hesitated. Then she sighed. You arrived on the Hogwarts grounds unconscious. The Triwizard Cup reappeared with you. Rose's fingers curled into the sheets. And Voldemort? She whispered. Pomfrey's mouth pressed into a thin line. The Ministry is investigating. That was not an answer. Rose closed her eyes briefly. I heard voices, she said quietly, when I was gone. Pomfrey stiffened. That is not uncommon after a near-death experience. I heard my mother, Rose insisted. She spoke to me. Pomfrey didn't reply immediately. Instead, she pulled the curtain aside slightly, and Rose caught a glimpse of movement outside. Shadows, too many of them. I had to clear the ward, Pomfrey said in a low voice. The headmaster wanted to be here the moment you woke. I sent him away. Rose frowned faintly. You sent Professor Dumbledore away? Yes, Pomfrey said firmly. You are my patient. He can wait. A small, weak smile tugged at Rose's lips. Thank you, she whispered. Pomfrey softened a fraction. Now, tell me what you remember. Rose swallowed. She told her everything. About the graveyard. About Voldemort. About the ritual. And finally, about the boy. He was very powerful and unafraid, Rose said, staring at the ceiling. Not of Voldemort, not of the Death Eaters. He talked to them like they were beneath him. Pomfrey listened intently. He stood in front of me, Rose continued. He told Voldemort to fight him instead. And when the killing curse came for him, her voice broke. I stepped in front of him. Pomfrey's eyes widened slightly. Why? Rose didn't hesitate. Because he would have died otherwise. Silence settled between them. And you were prepared to die? Pomfrey asked quietly. Rose nodded. Yes. Pomfrey exhaled slowly. Brave, foolish, very Gryffindor. Rose let out a shaky laugh. Did he make it? She asked finally, barely daring to hope. The boy. Pomfrey looked away. I don't know, she said honestly. The words hurt more than Rose expected. Her chest ached as grief crept in, heavy and cold. He shouldn't have died, Rose whispered. He didn't deserve it. Pomfrey placed a hand over Rose's. You don't know that he did. Rose swallowed, eyes burning. He fought Voldemort, she said, and there were so many of them. Pomfrey said nothing. Rose turned her head toward the window, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight. She was alive. Again. Saved again. But the thought that the boy, the strange, powerful boy who had stepped out of the shadows for her, might be dead because of it made her stomach twist painfully. I don't even know his name, she thought. Footsteps approached outside the curtain. Low voices. Pomfrey straightened. I will be back shortly, she said. Rest. She moved away, drawing the curtain fully closed. Rose lay there, staring at the ceiling. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her forehead. The scar was almost gone. She frowned faintly, fingertips brushing smooth skin where pain and lightning had lived her entire life. Something had changed. Something fundamental. Tears slid silently down her temples. Please be alive, Rose whispered to the empty ward. Outside, the castle of Hogwarts stood bathed in sunlight, unaware that the world had almost broken again, and that it had been saved not by prophecy, but by choice. By the time Professor Dumbledore arrived at the hospital wing, Rose was already sitting up in bed. Madame Pomfrey had allowed her exactly one concession to consciousness. A small tray floating beside her with toast, soup, and a cup of something warm that tasted faintly of honey and chamomile. Rose held the cup with both hands, more for the comfort of it than the drink itself. She was alive. That thought still felt unreal. Hermione hovered at her bedside like a nervous guardian spirit, adjusting Rose's pillows every few minutes, straightening the blanket, muttering under her breath about shock, magical backlash, and Pomfrey should really have kept her unconscious longer. "You're supposed to sip it," Hermione said, frowning, "not stare at it like it insulted you." "I am sipping it," Rose replied faintly. "You sipped it once." Across the aisle, Neville sat on the edge of the opposite bed, hands clasped tightly together, posture rigid. Ron leaned against the footboard, arms crossed, face pale and stubborn. "I still don't believe it," Ron muttered. "I mean, Voldemort? Back?" Neville swallowed. "She wouldn't lie." "I'm not saying she's lying," Ron snapped. "I'm saying there's no way. He was gone." Rose didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. The curtain at the entrance to the ward swept aside. Silence fell instantly. Professor Dumbledore stepped in, robes sweeping softly against the polished floor, blue eyes sharp and alert behind half-moon spectacles. His presence filled the room completely. Behind him, two Aurors guided a thin, shabby man forward. The man limped. His magical eye was dull. His hair was matted. "Professor Moody?" Neville said instinctively, half standing. The man turned his head slowly. His good eye was sharp, furious. "I am not your professor," Moody snarled. "I never taught a bloody lesson in this school." Neville froze. Ron's mouth fell open. "That blasted Crouch," Moody continued, voice shaking with restrained fury. "He wore my face, my bloody name, and I let him." He slammed his fist weakly against the bed frame, teeth gritted, not in anger at the students, but at himself. "I lost focus," he growled. "That's all it takes. One lapse, one moment." Dumbledore placed a steadying hand on Moody's shoulder. "You were imprisoned, Alastor. That is not failure." Moody snorted. "Feels like it." Rose watched quietly, heart heavy. Dumbledore turned to her then, gaze softening. "Miss Potter," he said gently, "I am very glad to see you awake." Rose nodded. "Professor." "I will be direct," Dumbledore said. "Voldemort has returned." Ron opened his mouth. Dumbledore raised a finger. "We have confirmed it," he continued calmly. "Barty Crouch Jr. was discovered impersonating Professor Moody for the entire year. He has confessed under Veritaserum." Hermione's breath hitched. "And?" she asked. Dumbledore's expression darkened. "He was kissed by a Dementor before he could testify publicly." A cold silence fell over the ward. Rose felt something twist in her chest. "So, no trial," Ron said quietly. "Just like Mr. Black," Hermione added bitterly. Dumbledore inclined his head. "Not in the way we would have liked." Moody's jaw clenched. "Cowards," he spat. "Every last one of them." Dumbledore turned back to Rose. "There is one thing I still require from you," he said. "Your memory of the events in the graveyard." Rose blinked. "My memory?" "Yes," Dumbledore said kindly. "Do not worry. I will take only a copy." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Dumbledore raised his wand and placed it gently against her temple. "Think of everything that happened," he said softly. From the moment you touched the cup. Rose closed her eyes. The maze. The graveyard. The ritual. The boy. The fight. The green light. When Dumbledore withdrew his wand, a silvery thread followed, drifting like moonlight. He conjured a small glass vial and guided the memory inside, sealing it carefully. There, he said, a copy only. Your memory remains yours. Rose exhaled shakily. Dumbledore's gaze lingered on her forehead, where the scar had been, where lightning had once lived. Now, only smooth skin remained, barely a shadow. Something like relief crossed his face. You have lost something dangerous, he said quietly. Rose frowned. What do you mean? Dumbledore smiled gently. Something I worried about for a very long time. But do not concern yourself with it, he said, already stepping back. What matters is that you are alive. He turned to leave. As he did, Hermione immediately leaned forward again. Your exams, she said firmly. You don't have to take them. Champions are exempt. Ron grinned suddenly. You won, Rose. Neville smiled too. Cedric would have been unbearable about it. Ron laughed. Serves him right. Hermione winced. Ron. Ron shrugged. He rejected you. In the Great Hall. Publicly. Bit of a Pratt move. Rose flushed faintly. I don't. But then. She paused. Cedric Diggory. Alive. A wave of relief washed over her so strongly she had to grip the blanket. I'm glad, she said quietly. They all looked at her. If Cedric had taken the cup, Rose continued softly, he would be dead. No one argued. Rose lay back against her pillows, exhaustion finally claiming her.